We are live.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go ahead and call this hearing to order. It is Wednesday, September 20th, and this is the first meeting during the interim of the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight. I am Senator Clarence Lamb, representing District 12 and the Senate co-chair of this committee. And we also have Delegate Attar, who is our House co-chair, and I'd like to welcome her as a new House co-chair for this committee. It's great to have her as part of this as well. We will begin, I guess, with any opening remarks from the chairs. On my end, I know we have a full agenda, so I don't have anything to add at the beginning of this, except to welcome the new members of the Joint Committee. We certainly appreciate your attendance and for being here. And we'll be going over some introductory kind of pieces to what the Joint Committee's purview is, and then dive right into some of the business. So let me pass along to Chair Attar, see if she has any remarks she would like to make.
Thank you, Chair Lamb. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting of 2023 for the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight. As the Senator mentioned, this is my first time being on this committee and my first time chairing this committee. I'm looking forward to working with all of you, and I want to thank everyone who took the time to be on here today. There's a lot of important information we have to cover and a long agenda, so thank you all, and we can jump right in.
Sounds good.
I believe we begin with David Smolsky.
Yes, and you should all have an agenda before you. I think it should also be on the public side of the website. But this is a brief history of the Joint Committee on Fair Practice and State Personnel Oversight. Mr. Smolsky.
Members of the Joint Committee, my name is David Smolsky for the record. I am an employee of the Department of Legislative Services. I also staff the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight. On your screen should be a one-page document, which is a very brief history of the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight. At the top, you'll see that in 1996, there was Chapter 37 of 1996, which reformed the state personnel management system. This was the first major reform of the laws governing state employees in many years, and attached to that bill in the back was uncodified language suggested by the administration back then that established a Joint Committee on Fair Practices. The Joint Committee was charged with oversight over state equal employment opportunity policies and practices, as well as procurement practices under executive order, although we never fully understood what procurement practices under executive order meant. That was also added in as uncodified language in the back of the bill. There wasn't much language associated with the Joint Committee back then. There was 3 senators and 3 delegates. There wasn't even any accommodation for establishing chairs, but nevertheless, a House chair and a Senate chair were designated. So over the years, what they've done is they've the Department of Secretary, or the Budget and Management, is required to report to the Joint Committee on a statewide EEO report. Also, the other statutory duty specifically mentioned in the law is that they have to provide advice to the state EEO on who is the state EEO coordinator. So since 1996, the Joint Committee has met when they do meet. Occasionally, when there's election years, they don't meet. But when they do meet, they have received the report, the statewide report on the EEO program from the Department of Budget and Management. In 1999, the Joint Committee made a recommendation to codify themselves so they could be like all the other statutory committees, including the Joint Audit Committee. That would have codified the Joint Committee on Fair Practices, and it would also have eliminated oversight over executive order policies because we weren't quite clear what that meant. Tammy, I can't see the entire document. How do we... Okay, thank you. Okay, that bill did not pass. It passed the House, but it did not make it out of the Senate. In 2009, there was another large set of, or in the late 2000s, there was another large set of legislation that passed the General Assembly that would have that reformed at-will employment in the state of Maryland. Along with that, it established a class of political special appointments and designated who is a at-will employee in state government, or as they called in the state personnel management system, special appointments. It also there were several agencies that had nothing but special appointments or at-will employees. A lot of those employees were moved back into the merit system. Along with Chapter 690 of 2009, the Joint Committee on Fair Practices was made permanent and put into codified law, and its name was expanded to become the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight, which is generally the same laws that govern the Joint Committee now. And it also specified that the Joint Committee has oversight over all state personnel systems, including the Maryland Department of Transportation and the higher ed personnel systems, as well as the state personnel management system. There was a further tweak in 2015 that clarified that the Joint Committee had oversight only over EEO policies and practices for state employees, not all employees in the state of Maryland. And it finally eliminated oversight over executive order procurement practices, because the Joint Committee never had any activities related to that. And we could never really figure out what that meant over the years. And on the side, a previous chair of the Joint Committee may have been the longest serving chair of a statutory committee that I'm aware of. She was the chair from the late 1990s until only a few years ago, and that is Speaker Jones. So she chaired this committee for over 20 years. And I've been staffing it since the start, but I guess that's neither here nor there. So if you have any questions, that is a brief history of the Joint Committee on Fair Practices.
Thank you, Mr. Smolsky. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, I believe we can begin with the overview of the major state personnel systems, and we begin with Ms. Secretary Grady from the Department of Budget and Management.
Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is Helene Grady. As you said, I'm Secretary of Budget and Management. Thank you, Senator Lamb and Delegate Attar, for the invitation to present today. And thank you, David, for that history and context. That was actually really helpful. So I am joined today by Cindy Colner, our Executive Director for Office of Personnel Services and Benefits, and Raquel Combs, our Chief of Staff at DBM. I want to thank them both for joining me today. We have submitted a written statement as well as some slides that we're hoping to spend a few minutes talking through with you all today. Before we jump into the slides, which really focuses on an overview of the state personnel management system, as you see on the screen, and Cindy will take the lead to walk you through that. We also wanted to just briefly provide a few highlights of some of the various personnel initiatives the Moore-Miller administration has been prioritizing over the past 8 months. We thought this might be helpful context for the Joint Committee. These efforts include focusing on rebuilding government through collaboration between OPSB, our Personnel Services and Benefits team here at DBM, and agency staff across the executive branch to aggressively recruit and hire as we work toward meeting government.
I have everything all set, but I don't hear I don't have the voice.
Oh, you can't hear me?
You probably muted again. So,
can you all not?
It's Zoom.
Then I don't hear them saying anything. They're talking, but I don't hear them.
Can others hear me on the meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes,
Okay.
the problem is probably at the senator's, with the senator's computer. She might have her computer muted. I don't know what we can do about that.
Should I keep going?
I'll call her office. Maybe somebody can answer, and you can keep going.
Great, thanks. Honestly, I just wanted to take another minute or two to summarize again some of the initiatives that we've been focused on related to HR in our first 8 months in office, the administration. So we talked a little bit about rebuilding government. We're working aggressively with our agency staff toward meeting Governor Moore's goal to reduce vacancies in state government by half we've been working on converting long-term contractual positions to regular positions. We've been implementing new contract provisions, MOU provisions, to ensure equity increases for current employees when new employees are hired at higher salaries, and helping agencies ensure that they are promoting employees when promotions are earned. Next, we've convened, with help from the legislature, a task force to modernize HR to ensure we are marketing state job opportunities aggressively and making it easy for applicants to navigate our systems and processes. Secretary Tisha Edwards from the Governor's Office of Appointments is chairing that task force, and we've had some really robust discussions over the first several meetings. Those meetings are recorded and posted on the DBM website, along with the presentation materials for anyone who's interested in following the work of that task force. We've been taking steps to study our salary structure to ensure we're paying competitive salaries and benefits, so that we not only recruit the best, so that we not only
click it. It should
Okay.
be-
only recruit the best,
Okay,
but
just
also
click it once.
Yeah, and it should unmute it.
retain and support
Don't hear it.
our employees and their families. Next, we are also
Only thing
planning
you could
to
do is
launch.
go out and go back in.
Okay,
You want me to send you a new link or?
yes, do that. Okay, let me close it.
Yeah, close out of it, close out of it.
Okay,
Okay, I'm sending you another link.
all right.
We are
Yeah,
planning
should be-
for.
Should be in your Outlook, should be the first thing that pops up in your Outlook folder.
She's muted, Madam Secretary, you can continue,
Okay,
I think.
thanks. I will wrap up quickly. Thank you. Thanks, David. We are planning currently for a statewide workplace culture survey. This may be the first, certainly in a long time, that we're aware of. And I actually want to shout out to some of our legislators early on, even in January of last year. I think the first hearing that I presented to legislators on was a hearing on the state workforce back in January with the House Appropriations Committee. And a number of legislators asked at that time about workplace culture surveys. So we are preparing to launch one. We're very excited about that. And then last but not least, we have been prioritizing spending quite a bit of time on relationship building, restoring trust, communication, and collaboration with our state employee unions. Myself personally, along with several colleagues across Governor's Office, all of our agency heads have been engaged in rebuilding those relationships and working with our unions toward a shared goal of creating more attractive and equitable workplace for state employees. So with that, I do want to, hopefully that has conveyed that these issues and issues of workforce and workplace are really of paramount priority and importance to the Moore-Miller administration. And as such, we have been putting quite a bit of our time and resources against these issues in our first 8 months. Does anyone have questions for me before I ask Cindy to kind of cover what we've been asked to present today, which is an overview of the state personnel
So
management system?
usually your unmute is on that lower left.
Madam Secretary, will you be on through the rest of the DBM presentation if we want to ask questions of you at the end?
Absolutely. I plan to stay for as much of the hearing as I'm able to.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks, David. David also said my statement is posted on the website too. So I'm going to hand off then to Cindy Colner, who's going to, with her
Keyboard.
incredible
Well, you don't have a
expertise,
keyboard,
walk
you
us
have a-
through this overview of the SPMS.
Thank you, Secretary Grady. Just for the record, my name again is Cindy Colner. I'm the Executive Director of DBM's Office of Personnel Services and Benefits. I am grateful to be a part of the Moore-Miller administration and super excited about all the initiatives that Secretary Grady has talked about the salary survey, about the culture survey, the rebuilding relationships with the union. So it's great to be a part of that. I'm going to you have all the slides. I'm not going to read the slides. I'm going to do a high-level overview. You can always reach me if you have questions. You can move to the next slide.
Yeah.
I don't think I have
Yeah.
control of the slides. Is that right? Okay. Before I jump into the actual slide presentation, I just want to say that most of what we do in the state personnel management system is guided by the statute. The statutory changes that were made back in 1996 that David referenced as the big personnel reform for the state personnel management system. The statute is very prescribed. From the statute, we've created regulations that also guide us and the agencies. And then we also have the memorandums of understanding that we've negotiated with the various collective bargaining representatives. So it's that bundle of regulations and laws and MOUs that really guide what we do. The state personnel management system is mainly decentralized in operations. It's centralized in.
All right,
So
then
you want to
mute.
mute yourself.
Okay,
It's centralized in oversight. OPSB is sort of the oversight entity for policy,
The mute.
pushing out policy.
Okay.
Turn it back on.
okay,
Go
got
to
it.
the next slide, please. This is the state personnel management system. It's all of the departments under the executive branch, with the exception of a few independent systems, mainly MDOT, the universities, Morgan, Baltimore City Community College, St. Mary's College. We have approximately 38,000 employees in the state personnel management system, and it's roughly about 64 agencies. Those are all those principal departments and a lot of other smaller agencies. Next slide, please. In addition to providing the personnel oversight that I just talked about a few minutes ago, we also administer the state employee health and benefits contracts. So we have a division within OPSB that, along with Secretary Grady, establishes the plan design for the health benefits
Leave the meeting and I'm gonna call Tammy.
of state employees and their dependents. So we also administer the contracts and put out requests for proposal for those contracts. We also implement them and coordinate with the vendors for the implementation of open enrollment and the benefits for all our employees. Next slide, please. I mentioned that we mainly have a decentralized HR system. So all of the large agencies, the principal departments, have individual units, HR units that deal with these issues, employee relations, leave keeping, payroll, etc. Next slide, please. DBM does have a central responsibility for the HR information systems that all of these agencies use, the 64 agencies that I referenced earlier. We have the Workday system that you all use for your open enrollment for benefits. We have the Workday system that we implemented for core HR and timekeeping for all of the agencies under the executive branch, except those with the independent systems. We also manage and implemented an online applicant tracking system known as Job Apps that all of our agencies also use. There's a central portal online where they post their jobs and all of the applicants come through that portal. And then we have the recruiters rate and score those applicants. We also have a learning management system. It's a module, online module that allows state employees to post training and allows employees to go on and take the training, mainly online training, but there is some capability for them to go in and log in and sign up for in-person training as well. So OPSB also has, this is a newly created division, a payroll division. When we implemented Workday, it forced us to create a payroll division where all of the employee agency files related to payroll come in through us as like a funnel before we send them to central payroll for employee pay. Next slide, please. Employee classifications and salary structure. This is all centralized within the Department of Budget and Management. Years ago, it was all decentralized. There was a decision, I guess about 20 years back, that centralized the employee classification structure completely under the Department of Budget and Management. We determined the grade levels, the pay structure for all the classifications and jobs in the state. Next slide. We do have approximately 11 different pay scales, but the standard pay scale is the primary pay scale that we have. It's a grade and step structure. Increments are not guaranteed. It's dependent on whether it's been budgeted. And of course, we have cost of living increases. All of these items are negotiated with state employee unions. Next slide, please. The annual salary review process. This is a process by where we look at the salary levels of individual classifications. So a grouping of engineers or a grouping of nurses. If an agency or a union or DBM believes that any of these groupings are below market or the job or the duties have increased in level, a request is submitted either through this ASR process, through the budget process, through the collective bargaining process. They all come in to our office. We do an analysis and offer recommendations to the Secretary of Budget. And well, we got to go back and negotiate those decisions. And then final recommendations are made to the Secretary and the Governor for possible inclusion of increases in the next budget. Next slide, please. Principles of state hiring. This is baked into our hiring process, fair and equitable treatment of all applicants, and our hiring decisions are based on merit. Those are for our merit-based positions. Next slide, please. Again, recruitment and hiring is one of those processes that is very much specified in the statute. It's a very structured process that we go through. I won't go through it all, but know where it is if you want more information about it. Next slide, please. Again, retaining good employees, all in the statute as well. Performance feedback twice a year. Typically January and July is when employees get their performance evaluations. Employees that have either performance or behavioral issues at work, there's a progressive discipline process so that merit protected employees have a process so that they have opportunity to correct any problems that they have in the workplace. Neither performance or discipline or performance or behavioral issues in the workplace should be a surprise to any employees. There should be that constant discussion with and feedback loop with supervisors. Next slide, please. Again, the statute does bake a process for imposing discipline whereby appointing authorities have to meet with employees and consider mitigation before imposing discipline. Next slide, please. There's an appeal process for both disciplinary actions as well as employee grievances, next slide, please. Ultimately, those processes, if they can't be worked out at the agency level with the agency appointing authorities, they come to DBM and we try to settle them with employees before they're sent to the Office of Administrative Hearings for a more formal adjudication process. Next slide, please. Collective bargaining. We do have an obligation to negotiate terms, conditions, and wages with our exclusive bargaining representatives. We have within the state personnel management system about 38,000 employees in the system. About 25,000 of those are covered by collective bargaining. Next slide, please. This slide shows our various bargaining units and the representatives. AFSCME is our by far the largest representative for our state employee unions. For our state employees, they have about 18,000 of the 25,000 employees covered under bargaining. The General Assembly just created a new unit last year, Maryland School for the Deaf Teachers, which they will be commencing negotiations. Next slide, please. With the rest of the unions, AFSCME, MPEC, and AFT for full contract negotiations at the end of this year. The police and fire unions have full contracts in place, and there's no economic reopeners on those contracts. We will be commencing, or the administration will be commencing negotiations with the next several weeks, and statutorily we're required to complete those negotiations by December 31st. And typically the negotiations have always been centralized either through DBM or through the Office of the Governor for the State Personnel Management System. And MDOT is also included under our negotiations as well. With that, I'll take any questions that you may have, or I'll leave you my phone number. You know, we're short on time today.
Any questions from members? Either raise your hand or raise your virtual hand. Delegate Lewis.
I just want to say that the feedback on the qualitative survey for employees is very well received, and I'll pass that on to my colleagues on the Appropriations Committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Lewis.
I have some questions. There are no other questions right now. The one question that I had was there are different state personnel management classifications, right? And one of them would be for political appointees, right? And those folks are handled differently than merit-based employees.
Correct.
Okay.
So-
Do you know? Go ahead.
I was just going to suggest, Cindy, maybe you can describe the difference between at-will and merit-based, and within at-will, political special appointment is only one category. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. Does that work, Chair Lamb? Does that
Yeah,
work
so
for you?
yes. If there's more that you want to say about that, you're welcome to. Political special appointment is only one subset of the larger at-will category, right?
Correct. So we have, as Secretary alluded, we have the merit-based employees. Those are our professional service. Those are employees that typically require a degree. And then we have skilled service, sort of everybody else. Then we have the group of at-will employees. Those are the executive level employees. So it's our agency heads and their deputies. It's about 207 of those. We have a grouping of special appointment employees, and those employees are either special appointment by statute or by authority of the Secretary of DBM because they play a significant policy role. Within that group, there is also a subset that have been identified or may be identified as a political special appointment. And those individuals, by virtue of their positions, may be hired or terminated for political affiliation, belief or affiliation. The whole definition is not coming to my head right now, but those are typically your legislative directors, special assistants, communication directors, direct assistants to an executive. So these are people that when you would have a change in administration, there might be change in these sort of key policy players. So we have those. And then we also have management service, which are also at-will employees. These are typically individuals who have managerial oversight over a division. So for personnel as well as finance. And these employees, by definition, cannot be fired for political affiliation or belief. That's baked in the statute. And then the other at-wills, like special appointments, although it doesn't say that they can't be terminated for political affiliation or belief, it's sort of implied because the political special appointment, it's specifically detailed in there that that's a basis for the termination. But again, at-will employees can be generally terminated for any reason that's not illegal or unconstitutional versus the larger merit group of employees where they go through that progressive discipline process that I spoke about in the initial presentation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so the political special appointments are a subset of these special appointments generally? Is that right? Or are all the special
Well, I
appointments
think-
considered political special appointments?
I think, I think of them as subsets, but I think technically they're just, they're two different sets, because if you're a political special appointment, you're not a special appointment, right? You're one or the other.
Okay,
Because the political special appointment and the special appointment have different reasons for terminations, right? The special appointments, you can basically be terminated for any reason, not illegal or unconstitutional. The political special appointments, the law specifies that you can be removed on the basis of political affiliation or belief.
Senator Lamb, I know that Cindy has a nice, I think, one-page summary of these definitions and the differences that I'd be happy for us to share with the Joint Committee if it'd be helpful. I know Cindy shared it with me during the transition just to help me get educated on these various designations.
yeah, if you could, that would be great, and I'd appreciate that. And don't want to dive into that much more deeply here. I did have a question for you, Madam Secretary, and this is, I guess, more generally, but in the past, there have been some concerns about the governor's appointments office seeking to influence the hiring and firing of non-political appointees. Now, under this new administration, to what extent is there data sharing between the appointing authorities and the appointments office? And to the extent that there is information sharing, how do we protect against the politicization of state employment?
Thanks for that question. You know, I might need Cindy to weigh in as well. To my experience these past 8 months, I don't know of a lot of data sharing with the appointments office with regard to specific individual hiring or termination decisions in the agencies. I don't have transparency into that, and I don't have the sense that there's been a lot of that happening. I will say that Secretary Edwards, as I mentioned earlier, is helping, is really partnering actually to DBM on a number of our initiatives around rebuilding government, recruitment and hiring, generally just with regard to really being a force multiplier for myself and Cindy and our teams. And she's brought a great energy and insight and expertise with regard to, you know, opening up state government in a broader way to the pool of candidates out there statewide who may have an interest in public service, helping us think through from a business operations point of view, how to pick up the pace of recruitment and hiring, how to rethink our processes, our systems, et cetera. And she's been a really valuable partner to myself and Cindy in that regard. I think that's a very different, probably a different role, you know, historically, my understanding for Secretary of Appointments to play in terms of partnering with DBM in that way. But I also think very different than what you're suggesting with your question. So I'm not familiar myself with much involvement from the governor's appointments office with regard to individual hiring decisions within agencies outside of the top level appointments, of course, that they are charged with. Cindy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do want to add that I have been along with David in this committee, and I understand the concern about the appointments office and the interplay with the merit position. I understand it very well. I was on the subcommittee that David referenced regarding Speaker Jones and the rebuild in terms of the special political special appointments. And from day 1 or 2 of this administration, I talked to Secretary Edwards about the committee's concerns, and she completely understands, and she has been very, very good about recognizing that there's a very bright line between merit and then sort of the appointments positions. And I think she's been very, very good about recognizing it and respecting it, and been very careful not to cross any lines. And certainly I don't want to be back before you guys. I don't think anybody wants to. And we have been very careful about that. So I commend her for that.
So it sounds as though, you know, there's a cognizance of a firewall between, particularly for the merit positions, right? That if there's information that comes in about folks seeking employment to the appointments office, because that might be the case and people might contact them, that they pass that along to the the department itself or any of the specific appointing authorities for them to make the decision on those merit-based positions. It's really just kind of a passing of information along.
That's my understanding. My understanding is she encourages people to go through the DBM website to if there's other opportunities out there. So
okay,
firewall's a good way to put it.
Got it. Last question then, and this probably is also for the secretary. So over the years, as the Senate chair of this committee, I've received complaints about at-will employees who are concerned that if they raise complaints that they could be fired. How do we ensure that all employees are comfortable or feel free to raise concerns when they have them?
That's a great question. It's pretty foundational, I think, to the work that we're trying to do with regard to workplace culture. Some of that work is in collaboration with our unions and also beyond just the collaborative work with the unions. I think I think later in the series of hearings, Nicole Webb will be presenting a little bit on our statewide EEO activities and our annual report. Nicole will be able to describe in more detail the work that she and her team do in conjunction with the EEO and fair practice officers in the agencies to ensure that employees and managers are trained on processes for filing complaints, for appealing outcome of grievances, et cetera, and what those avenues are. I commend Nicole and the work she's done in her just over a year in the role statewide with the team that she has to really leverage the officers across the agencies and ensure that folks understand processes, that word is getting out, and that employees understand their avenues for raising concerns. I think we probably have a lot more work to do is my initial assessment. I anticipate us learning more through this survey that we're getting ready to hopefully launch this fall. And then, pulling together some action plans based on what we learned through the survey with regard to where we need to do more work and what initiatives in particular might serve us well. I'm also very open to feedback from joint committee members on our efforts in that regard.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate the information here and kind of that reassurance. Any other questions for DBM? Okay, well, seeing none, thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Kolner. Appreciate the time and the information this morning.
Okay, thank you, Chair Lamb. We're going to move on to the University System of Maryland, and we're going to begin with Dr. Shears Ashby, the president of University of Maryland. Thank you for joining us this morning.
I'm so sorry. I don't want to interrupt President Ashby.
I was about to do the same thing you're about to do, so please.
It's been suggested that Sherry Rojas and I give you sort of the overview first, and then President Ashby can wrap up with her comments. Is that acceptable to you?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak to the Joint Committee and give you some information that I hope will be helpful to you in your work in the session ahead. Both, as I said, Sherry Rojas, the USM Director of Labor, and I will be giving you this overview. I'm Carolyn Skolnick, Associate Vice Chancellor for Policy and Human Resources at the USM. And Sherry is going to be advancing the slides, and I thank Sherry for that. So we can go on to the next slide. We're going to be talking about USM's independent personnel system. But first, I need to give you just a little bit of background about the system itself, which is a highly decentralized higher education system, which is different than some systems across the country, which are very centralized. And part of it being decentralized is that there is a high value placed on autonomy and flexibility of the institutions. The USM is comprised of 12 separate higher ed institutions across the state and 3 higher education centers. We have the flagship university at College Park, a medical school, law schools, a premier online university, research-intensive universities, historically Black universities, and comprehensive master's universities. And each of these institutions has a unique mission, specific needs, and their own budget. In the late 1990s, the Larson Commission was tasked by the General Assembly to review public higher education in Maryland, and they recommended a decentralized higher education system. They recommended that that system absolutely included institutional autonomy and flexibility, and there was specific statutory authority granted to institution presidents. The USM operations funding model, just for a little background, the state provides about 60% of operating funds, and those funds include both tuition and fees and general funds and higher education investment funds. The institutions generate the remaining funds through grants, contracts, and their auxiliary services. Maryland relies on these institutions to be entrepreneurial and to contribute to the state's economic growth, while also keeping in mind that it's very important that higher education be affordable for Marylanders. So again, autonomy and flexibility are vital for these significant achievements. The governance structure of the university, first of all, the USM's legal authority stems from statute, and Maryland law established the USM as a public corporation with all the rights and powers of any other public corporation. It established the authority of the institution presidents, who serve as the chief executive officer of the institution. They are responsible and accountable to their boards, which all of them have the same board, which is the USM Board of Regents. The Board of Regents creates policies, and you'll see if you look at the website, there's a whole set of personnel policies and EEO policies. And that's as opposed to regulations, which, as DBM mentioned, they, under their statute, they pass regulations. Under our statute, the board puts in place policies. And then also the president's specific authority is extensive regarding personnel, and it includes appointing, promoting, setting salaries, assigning duties, and terminating personnel. We operate in a competitive talent market and have to compete nationally for top talent to bring in university presidents, faculty, administrators, and our higher level staff. We offer competitive pay based on market factors, and our job security for employees and merit increases are tied to performance. So this attractive total compensation helps draw high caliber candidates. In addition to the market-based salaries, we offer a very compelling benefits package that includes tuition remission, which is one of our most popular benefits, and the optional retirement plan. And by the way, the USM has been nationally recognized for its efficiencies and effectiveness initiatives. This personnel system has been in place for about 35 years. We have almost 40,000 employees across the 12 institutions. Of those, around 17,000 fall into one of the faculty categories. And we do have a number of unique employee categories, including tenured and tenure track faculty, adjunct faculty, and full and part-time contractual faculty. We have academic administrators. We also have regular non-exempt and exempt staff. We have contingent 1 and contingent 2 staff. We have student employees, athletic coaches, presidents, and high-level administrators. And our faculty work varied schedules. Some of them work 12 months a year, some work 10 months a year, and some work 9.5 months a year. And all of those are considered full-time positions. Our regular staff are either full or part-time, and they typically work year-round. Some of our contingent staff work only by the semester or on an as-needed basis. Our vacancy rate in June was 7.9%. We have a good retention rate, and we offer significant promotional opportunities. We have separate pay plans for the hourly employees, our non-exempt employees. We have a pay plan that it is not the same as the states. The state has a grade and step pay plan, but we have we also have grades, but not steps within the plan. We offer there's minimum, midpoint, and maximum salaries are identified. And for the exempt pay plans, the institutions have the right to create their own exempt pay plan and submit it to the board for review. There are reviews done every other year of each pay plan, and market rate adjustments are implemented if the market has been increasing. In January 22, the minimum wage for all pay plans was raised to $15 per hour. So now I'd like to turn it over to Sherry Rojas to give you more information about the importance of personnel autonomy.
Good morning. Thank you, Carolyn. I'm just going to continue with the remainder of the slide presentation and again, go through some additional details related to the USM personnel system that demonstrate the importance of personnel autonomy. Academic freedom and tenure play a large role in managing faculty. Academic freedom is a constitutional right for all of our faculty, which allows the pursuit of knowledge without undue influence. Additionally, tenure track faculty have a contractual right to apply for and be evaluated for tenure, which is a property right that's protected by due process. These two concepts are something that are unique to the higher education framework. Shared governance is a fundamental principle in higher education. Our faculty, staff, and students have a voice in university governance through our shared governance process. This is something that is distinct from the SPMS, where the concept of shared governance is absent. The USM personnel policies are customized for the higher education context. The policies are grounded in Maryland law and relevant to higher education in the USM and reflect distinct operational needs of our institutions, like operating on an academic calendar year and in our loco parentis responsibilities for students. Our personnel policies are developed with input from stakeholders through shared governance. As you all know, the law extends collective bargaining rights to certain employee groups, including certain employees within the USM. We currently have 3 recognized exclusive representatives that represent employees within the system. AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, is our largest. MCEA, the Maryland Classified Employees Association, and the FOP, Fraternal Order of Police, also represent employees within our system. Between these 3 union groups, they represent 25 individually certified bargaining units across the system. Those units include exempt, non-exempt, and sworn police personnel. The memorandum of understanding that in place are between the unions and our institutions. The terms and conditions vary under the MOUs as well as the effective dates. We have diverse HR and IT systems. There's no standard HR or IT system across our USM institutions or with the state. There's varied compensation and pay administration plans. While our non-exempt staff share similar pay structures, these are different from state employee plans. Our USM institutions have the authority to create their own job titles and job specifications, which means that the USM and SPMS do not share the same job titles or specs. Our university budgets rely heavily on tuition revenue and strive for self-sustainability. And we also have several regulatory considerations that we operate under. USM institutions are subject to various federal employee regulations, including specialized complaint procedures, such as those found under Title IX. There are specific federal laws for scientific research, treatment of subjects, and reporting, which are all unique to higher education. The existing infrastructure for managing employees on federal grants and contracts is restricted to higher education. So again, these rules and requirements are really things that are unique to the higher education framework. And finally, our institutions must adhere to accreditation standards. Accreditation dictates governance structures and can have implications for employee management. Accreditation is not a concern for other state agencies, but it is a real and an important consideration for those operating under the higher education framework. That was just sort of a very quick and high level overview of the USM personnel system. We hope that you found this information to be helpful. We're happy to answer any questions or to provide any additional information that you have either here today, or if there's additional information that you ever need from us, please feel free to reach out. At this time, and before we get to questions, I would like to turn it over to President Ashby to share some additional comments with you all.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you all taking the time to hear from us today. So first, let me just say, I always start here to say how proud I am to be in the University System of Maryland. It is extraordinary. As a North Carolinian who spent a lot of my career in other public higher education systems, I have to tell you, we are a national leader here in the state of Maryland in public higher education. And I believe that is because the USM has actually gotten its purpose, its structure, and its operations right. The strength, as you saw before, is that we have these 12 institutions, each with distinctive excellence and unique qualities. Not one, which is rare in a public system, not one institution replicates the other. And that fact allows us together to serve all types of students across the state very well. So it doesn't matter if you're a first-gen student or a transfer student, commuters, part-time, full-time, in-person, online, from the western part of the state, you want a rural experience, a city experience, you name it. Because we are 12 distinct institutions, we are able to offer all students, all Marylanders, an opportunity to have a great college education within the state. And I often say to my colleagues outside, we are doing this right, and the diversity we have is a beautiful thing. So how did we get it right in Maryland when so many others across the country are struggling to get it right? And I believe it's because we actually have the right balance in our structure and operations. We operate in a highly collaborative and collegial way, and yet every institution within the USM possesses the flexibility and the autonomy that you've heard about to make choices that serve their specific students and communities well. So this includes the ability to recruit top faculty and staff talent from across the state and from around the world to advance our individual distinct missions on our campuses. So people like me are attracted to the healthy system that we have, but we come here to work with unique, extraordinary teams of faculty, staff, and students on our specific campuses. So that autonomy and flexibility is really important. So another important part of this conversation is the role of a university president. As I was listening to all of that responsibility that I have, I thought, my God, that was fascinating to hear it. And we do have all of that responsibility, and we have the authority to make decisions. And I'm a true believer in keeping responsibility and authority tied together. When somebody has authority and somebody else has responsibility, that's a problem always. But I want to highlight that the role of the president is not this heavy-handed thing that authority sounds like. It's actually to be in service to the UMBC and its people. It's the challenge of balancing that, but we are absolutely in service. All of our leaders are in service to our campuses, and it's not the other way around. The folks are not in service to the leadership. And year after year, UMBC's service is clear to its people, is clear, and it's landed the university on the national rankings of great colleges to work for. Now, that's pretty amazing. By the way, I've never been at an institution that lands there repeatedly, so I'm excited to be here. And this data that informs that list is gathered from our own people. And so UMBC was recently named to that list for the 14th year in a row. And again, this year, we are one of the few colleges in the country to be recognized in all 10 categories. And I'm just going to take a moment to list the categories because I want you to hear what our people think of us. They list us and they list us in the top of these categories: job satisfaction and support, faculty and staff well-being, supervisor department chair effectiveness, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, compensation, shared governance, which you just heard about, which is a fundamental bedrock in higher education, faculty experience, professional development, confidence in senior leadership, and finally, mission and progress. So imagine the 2,000 faculty and staff who we have on our campus coming to work every day feeling empowered and supported. And what happens is they turn around and they give that gift of empowerment and support to our 14,000 students. And Maryland is the beneficiary of that, with 80% of our brilliant, confident graduates being employed in the state, contributing to the workforce and creating economic prosperity for themselves, for their families, and for their communities. When you think about the economic trajectory change that we give to students when they're first gens, and a number of our students are first gens, or when they're community college students who have families, it is a game changer. And so I'll end just where I started. After 1 year, I am still thrilled to be here. People keep asking me, do I miss North Carolina? I said, I miss my family, but that's about it. And so I was attracted to this healthy, functioning system that has a real core value in inclusive excellence. We are a national model. And as such, we have the opportunity, but I actually believe we have a responsibility to continue demonstrating to public higher education across the country the beauty that happens when you get the balance right of collaboration, flexibility, and autonomy. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, President Ashby. That was a lot of great information. And as an alumni, I love to hear it all. So thank you. Are there any questions from any of the members? You can unmute yourself, raise your hand. Chair Lamb.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for those remarks, President Ashby. I wish I still had UMBC in the Baltimore County part of my districts. With redistricting, I lost the university, but appreciate all the work done there. I did have a question generally about referring back to some of the slides from earlier in the presentation. There was a slide on academic freedom, and it referenced the fact that the faculty there at USM have a constitutional right to pursue their interests and be able to say what they intend to say. We've seen institutions, state university institutions in other states really kind of take a different look and perspective on academic freedom. When you refer to the academic freedom enshrined in as a constitutional right, are you referring to the First Amendment constitutional right, or is there a different constitutional right that allows our faculty to have the freedom that they need for their academic pursuits?
No, it would be the First Amendment, but let me double check that and get back to you.
Got it. Thank you.
And I will do that.
And just a last kind of follow-up question. You also cited as part of the presentation the value of shared governance, which I agree with as well. And the shared governance exists for folks that are in bargaining unit kind of positions. I guess my question is, what is your view on having that shared governance also extend to adjunct and graduate students that are employed, right? I think this has come up as a question before, but if the shared governance is applicable across the board for unionized positions, what's the perspective on applying that for these other positions?
Well, first of all, just to be clear, because certain employees are represented by either AFSCME, MCEA, or the FOP, to the extent that our shared governance groups, like our student groups, faculty senates, staff senates on different campuses, and then we have USM-wide shared groups for those three categories. Those groups, by law, cannot actually represent the interests of employees who are in a bargaining unit. Employees who are in a bargaining unit, their interests are represented by their exclusive representative. So that's just one distinction I want to make sure you understand. So with regard to graduate assistants, they are students. They are part of shared governance, based on their status as students. And adjunct faculty are part of shared governance based on their status as adjuncts. But I would have to go back and look at sort of the rules for each different university with regard to how they set up their committees. They're not all the same. For example, at College Park, they don't have a separate Senate for each of the three main groups. They have one large university Senate that includes all of them. And then other universities may have a separate student Senate, a separate staff Senate, and a separate faculty Senate. And I don't know if anybody else wants to offer anything, Sherry or President Ashby, on that.
So your view is that shared governance is an alternative to precludes the need for collective bargaining for those folks?
I'm not sure I would put it that way, but it sort of depends on what you see the function of collective bargaining. But collective bargaining is very codified in law regarding the subjects that are covered and the power of the authority of the exclusive representative to speak on behalf of those employees. Shared governance is not something that's statutorily created. It is a long practice in higher education. And it is the concept that the various stakeholders should be able to participate in governance of the institution.
And the only thing that I would add is that I love that each institution really can decide how they do that work based on the culture of the institution and the people who they serve. At UMBC, I was just in a meeting yesterday where I gathered all of our shared governance leaders. There were undergraduates, there were graduate students, there were adjunct faculty. It's the nature of UMBC. It's a really deeply rooted shared governance institution. And so it's very active on our campus, and we are better because we actually get to do it the way that works for our campus. And our people feel good about that.
Got it. That's helpful. I don't think I have anything else to add.
I do have a quick question if you have anything else. So first, how many of your employees in the system have union representation? Do you have that number?
Yes, we do. Go ahead, Sherry.
Sure. Thanks, Carolyn. So across the system, we have approximately 6,000 employees who are represented by a union group.
Okay. And I know we also talked a lot about decentralizing and the importance of that. When it comes to your terminating personnel process, is that decentralized by institution, or do you have at least an appeal procedure, or as it goes up the ladder, is there more a centralized procedure so it's kind of equal amongst all the institutions?
So there's a personnel policy that was implemented by the Board of Regents that applies to all institutions, and it says that non-exempt or hourly employees may only be terminated for cause. Exempt employees who are represented by a bargaining unit may only be terminated for cause. Exempt employees who are not represented by a bargaining unit may be terminated either by cause or after they're given a specified period of notice, depending on their length of service. And the period of notice ranges from 1 month to 1 year. All of those employees have a right to appeal the decision to terminate them. There's a grievance procedure set forward in our statute, and it's very similar to the grievance procedure for state personnel management system. Employees first, there's a 3-step process. They first appeal to their supervisor or the department chair. It's an internal process. Then they can appeal to the level of the president's office, and then they can make a final appeal either to the chancellor or the chancellor can defer to the Office of Administrative Hearings, and the chancellor has deferred to the Office of Administrative Hearings. So that's the same final hearing body that adjudicates the termination of state employees. And just to let you know, the reason there's a difference in the for cause or the notice termination between represented employees and non-represented employees is because there's a state law that specifies non-represented, or it specifies that represented exempt employees may only be terminated for cause.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other questions from the members? Okay, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Lamb.
All right, thank you. I think that wraps up USM, unless there's anything else to add from folks. Thank you, President Ashby and Ms. Skolnick and Rojas as well.
Thank you.
We'll proceed further on the agenda. The next topic before the committee is workplace culture, employee relations. And we're going to begin with the Department of Natural Resources and Secretary Josh Kurtz. Secretary Kurtz.
Good morning, Vice Chair Lamb, Vice Chair Attar, and members of the committee. Thank you so much for having me today to discuss workplace culture as it pertains to the Department of Natural Resources, Maryland Park Service. For the record, my name is Josh Kurtz. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come in and discuss where we are in terms of building a strong culture within the Department of Natural Resources that's focused on fairness, equity, transparency, and communications. There was extensive media coverage last fall about significant issues pertaining to the parks, especially in gunpowder. And so what I wanted to discuss today was when we took over, kind of what we learned, how we learned those lessons, and how we've been moving forward to ensure that that culture is one that represents the Moore Miller administration. Before I jump into that, I did want to orient everybody to the scale of the Park Service, because there's some uniqueness in the structure that I think is important for when we think about improving that culture. So the Park Service is widely dispersed. We manage 140,000 acres all across the state of Maryland, 276 authorized pins, and the Great Maryland Outdoors Act has added 75 pins, which we're incorporating into the system this year. Another interesting element about the Park Service is that every year we have 700 seasonal employees. So a very large amount of temporary employees that come into the system that help us get through the busy season, and the busy season really being the summer months. The Park Service also is really unique in that it's a rather distributed leadership model. We have the centralized leadership of the director, the deputy director, and kind of the operations staff based out of Annapolis. And then we have regional managers and then park managers moving down into rangers, maintenance staff, et cetera. And so what we found was a culture that was one that was not cohesive and was not one that reflected the values that we expect to see and we will require to see as the administration. And we learned about this in large part because of the original investigation that had gone on into Gunpowder State Falls, Gunpowder State Park, but we went and we really wanted to listen to and hear from our park staff kind of up and down the chain. In 2005, another important a bit of context, the Park Service was originally a law enforcement entity until 2005. And in 2005, it split. And so now all of our ranges are civilian employees, although there still is a paramilitary structure and a bit of a paramilitary culture that has pervaded until now. And I think that has at times suppressed communication up and down the chain and made members of the Park Service feel uncomfortable going outside of that chain of command, whether that be to HR or to our Office of Fair Practices. So that was a really critical piece immediately for us, was to encourage that communication, ensure that those employees and those staff members knew that they had those opportunities to engage with leadership at all levels of the Park Service and create those pathways. So in order to do that, we organized town halls. We did 6 across the state where we had open discussion and then one-on-one opportunities for myself and the leadership team with any staff member that wanted to take it to let us know what was going on. We learned a lot in those town halls and in follow-up conversations with individuals. And one of the things I'd say on the positive side that we learned is, since it's a distributed leadership model, we did have many of our parks and where our park managers were really leading by example and really living the values that we expect to see in the Moore Miller administration. And I think that gave us an opportunity to not only instill new culture, but to build and expand some of the positive culture that existed in the Park Service. So we learned that through those processes of just getting out in the field and talking to our staff. We also put in place investigative processes for specific instances of bullying, harassment, and other violations through our human resources team and also through the Office of Fair Practices to ensure that any issues that were going on, one, everybody knew how that process worked and felt comfortable going to those that were responsible for those investigations. And then we looked at the leadership team. When we took over, there was no director, no deputy director. We were missing one of the 4 regional managers. There were several of our largest state parks that did not have park managers. So we were in a place where the park staff were really holding it together with, we affectionately refer to it as bubble gum and shoelaces. And so what we did was we immediately, in evaluating the leaders, we put 19 acting leaders in place, and we didn't do it one by one. We built a team, and we brought that team together and discussed what the culture would look like, how we lead, how we set example, and kind of bringing together the rest of those that were in existing leadership roles, especially our state park managers. And we built from there. So we have acting leadership now, led by Angie Crenshaw, who's been a park director, park manager across the system, and put in place those leaders really based on the culture we wanted to see embodied across the system. So once we kind of had that leadership team in place, we continued to really look at what are some of the things that contribute to that culture, and really what we needed to change to improve that culture to where we needed it to be. So the first thing we saw was, frankly, a broken communication system. When we took over, there was no they were not holding annual meetings at the regional level or at the leadership level. There weren't opportunities for the park staff, more of the rank and file park staff, to have interactions outside of their parks. So if there were issues, they were really staying very contained. And I think what we saw in the media about gunpowder really highlighted that. So we needed to ensure that we created those pathways for communication outside the parks and up and down the chain. So we reinstituted those regional meetings. We reinstituted meetings with the leadership, and we require that our leadership team is out in the parks, being physically present. I think one of the things that we saw at the end of the last administration was a lack of that. We didn't have a first name basis and knowing who you even go to, knowing your leadership. So been really proud of the team getting out there. We've really evaluated too some of the dynamics between different units or different structures within the Park Service. There really has been an inequity between our park rangers and our maintenance staff. That's in terms of pay, responsibility, and really representation. The maintenance staff did not have representation in any of our leadership spaces. So we've created those opportunities for our maintenance staff to weigh in when leadership decisions are being made. And I think that's been really important in starting to kind of further build those relationships across the units. And interestingly, what we saw was at the parks themselves, the individual parks, our maintenance staff and our ranger staff worked really well together, highly collaborative, and had a great deal of respect. It just was not then being demonstrated in the leadership structures. Another thing we looked at was what policies do we have in place that could create inequity or could create power imbalance? And we really identified two, those being our housing policy and the transfer policy. So in the Department of Natural Resources, we have over 300 residential homes. The decisions on who lived in those homes was being made by individual park managers, sometimes regional managers. There was no set policy. There was no set strategy for how that was done. It was not transparent. It was not understood. So we convened a working group internally to create a policy and a structure for how we assign those houses. We're also auditing each one of those houses to ensure they're safe and livable for our staff. And now we have an overarching and transparent policy and program so that staff can actually apply to live in those operational houses, contributing to the mission of the parks. And also knowing that there's fairness in that. It's not something that can be kind of given out, right, as a reward, which can then create a culture of in-groups and out-groups. So we really wanted to get away from that. I think that's something that we found in some instances across the parks. The other being the transfer policy, again, not well understood, not application driven, more of a who you know. You could then be moved around the Park Service to different units. And we wanted to ensure that every one of our Park Service employees had the opportunities to transfer. They understood what they needed to do to transfer and that we had a transparent process. So we've set that up as well and centralized that internally within the agency. Another piece that we're really working to do is break down some of the silos between the Park Service and other units in DNR. It's important for our Park Service personnel and staff to be able to have relationships with the Forest Service managers, to be able to have relationships with the natural resource managers and our wildlife management area managers so that they can share ideas, but also if they're seeing things that make them uncomfortable, they have other kind of reporting opportunities and relationships to be able to communicate outside of the chain of command within the Park Service. Another thing we've done is we've worked to bolster our Office of Fair Practices. When we started, we had one Fair Practices Office Director. We now have an Office Director, two EEO officers, and an intake coordinator. So really making sure that we're able to process any potential issues and investigate them in a timely manner and address them quickly. We've also, on the HR side, have beefed up our investigative unit as well for things that fall outside the purview of the Office of Fair Practices, but still ensuring that we have a very sound culture within the Park Service and one that's based off of fairness, ability to communicate. So our next step is really looking at structure. We have the 75 pins, and we want to ensure that as we incorporate these pins into the Park Service, we're doing so in a way that builds our capacity on the ground, but also builds our leadership capacity. We're looking at how we better train our managers, how we ensure that our managers understand the tools that they have and the requirements that we have of them to ensure that they're creating a safe and equitable environment for all of our staff. And for our seasonal staff, because when you come in as a seasonal staff, there can also be a significant power imbalance there. Right? You're there for a short amount of time, and oftentimes these people want to be getting into the Park Service. So 700 seasonals, 276 pins, those opportunities are few and far between, and create opportunities in the past have kind of demonstrated that if you would do certain things, you could become part of that in-group. And we wanted to, again, make sure that culture was removed in the Park Service. Another really important tool for us, and I'd like to thank all of you, was developed in the Great Maryland Outdoors Act. And it's actually an independent consultant that's been brought in by the Department of Legislative Services. They've done a fantastic job of also being a kind of third party that can talk about culture, poll our staff, and really help us learn and better understand how we can move forward with our policy changes, our structural changes to ensure that we have that we are getting to the culture that we need to have within the Park Service and more broadly across the Department of Natural Resources. So you also have written testimony from me as well, detailing some more of what we've done, what we saw, how we got here. But I wanted to just kind of make those high level points now, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions that they may have. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Secretary Kurtz. Questions from the members of the committee?
I do have one, Chair Lamb.
Go ahead.
So thank you, Secretary. So you talked about that we've all heard in the news about what happened at gunpowder and everything, and obviously there are many concerns surrounding that. You mentioned two of the biggest issues you were finding is that with the housing policy and the transfer policy. Are you able to discuss a little bit more about what the new policies are and why you believe that will help and not lead to similar issues?
Absolutely. So the two key tenets of both of them is an open application process. Before there was a housing list and a transfer list, the housing list was not public to anybody in the Park Service outside of a few leaders. So those assignments of housing were kind of done in the dark, right? Behind the curtain. And so what we've done is we've created a policy where anybody, actually any DNR employee, not just Park Service, can apply to live in one of those houses. Each one of those houses, though, does have a set of operational requirements that go along with it. Closing a gate at night, locking a gate, mowing the grass, et cetera. So what we've done is we've detailed really what each property, what they provide for the park system, and then what the requirement would be to live in that within that house and to continue to work within the park system, and then made it completely available for application. We've also created a housing board basically internally. So that's several of our leaders that sit on that board that review the applications. And we ensure that the people that are applying can meet those minimum requirements. If there's multiple folks that meet the minimum requirements, we are then randomizing. So if you meet the minimum requirements, it's a random draw for who gets to live in the house. So that's the crux of the policy in the housing space. And I can share more details with the committee. Again, internal policy. And then transfer, very similar. We are basically having a hiring process, if you will, internally to the department. You can put in for a transfer. We have, several of our parks that I think are really seen as places people want to go. They want to work, or they have family members that work in different areas. They want to be closer. There's a wide range of reasons that people look to transfer. So when we have opportunities within the Park Service, a lead ranger position opens up at Patapsco, instead of saying, okay, we've got this kind of transfer list that again was developed by a small number of people. Here is the application process you can go for in order to get that position.
Okay, so prior to these policies in place, the park managers were just making these decisions on their own?
Yep. Park managers, sometimes regional managers. It really, frankly, depended based on the parks and the transfers and the houses. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So just to follow up on that, it seems, and you can kind of illuminate us on this, but it seems like this is longstanding policy, which is, or practice rather, which is shocking in many ways when you describe the level of, it sounds like preferential treatment and just the opaqueness of the process when it came to state supported housing and also the transfer policy. This seems to have extended back many, many years, I guess, right? And you cite the fact that previously this was a law enforcement organization and transitioned, partially or in part to being more of a civilian-based kind of enforcement organization agency. But that's still kind of a work in progress, right? And perhaps this might be part of that as well.
Yes. I would describe these as longstanding. I think one of the things that's interesting is as we've acquired land, we've acquired structures and we've acquired houses. And so maybe, years prior where we didn't have as many, maybe not having a fully fleshed out policy was a decision made by previous administrations. I'm not sure. But as we've acquired more, I think it's just really highlighted the fact that we needed a very concrete and discrete policy that we could, share with legislators, share with, frankly, anyone, so that it's a transparent process, it's understood, and we're not really giving a benefit inequitably across the park system.
Right. Yeah, it's really shocking in some ways when you describe that there are like 300 units of state-supported housing across our facilities, and there was no policy as to how that was actually being designated out to employees. Very surprising in many ways. You mentioned now that you have in the past, I guess about 8 months that you've been in this role, really had to formulate new leadership for the Park Service, and brought on, I think you said, about 16 new acting managers in various roles in the Park Service. I guess what's in these acting roles, I think you're giving them an opportunity to see how they function and be able to build a team. What's your time frame and perspective of how you're going to form a more permanent management and leadership team there at the Park Service, and the time frame of that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the key for us, frankly, was to maintain operational integrity for the busy months. So we wanted to get through Labor Day and ensure that we were still providing a world-class experience for our Park Service visitors and also for our employees. We have now moved into that phase of layering in those 75 pins. We're re-looking at the structure of the Park Service in its entirety right now, and we're doing that in a couple of different ways. One is working with these consultants who have expertise in setting up systems. Two is actually going back out to the staff with surveys to understand where are there areas we could be increasing capacity in a more centralized way and out in the field to better build that structure. Once we have that structure, which we were expecting to have complete by the end of October, that's when we will then go into the hiring process for many of these leadership positions. And as you pointed out, I do think we've had, what the folks that frankly raised their hands and stepped into an incredibly difficult situation in the parks have done is it's not just commendable, like we should be celebrating it. We saw tremendous leadership from park managers, stepping into these roles and saying, we aren't going to tolerate, we want to be a part of this culture change. We want to help work through policies, and we want to do it while we're managing the busiest season of the park system. And so I think we have an incredible bench of leadership in the park system. And so as we build this structure, we'll be looking to tap into potentially into that bench, but also creating more opportunities for leaders from outside the agency, across the agency, to move into these roles, whether they be in more centralized function around project planning or GIS, or the creation of new rangers in different parks that are really at capacity or need additional assistance on the ground.
So just to be clear, when you took over this role, it sounded as though the upper leadership or almost the entire management structure of the Park Service was vacant, right? That folks had been let go prior to you getting there, and had it not been for a lot of these current acting managers to be able to step up in this role, we would have had even a very difficult time opening up our state parks for this past summer.
That is absolutely correct. What they were able to accomplish in a rather short amount of time in terms of building cohesiveness and rebuilding trust and building communication is incredible. I think I'm just proud of what they've been able to do and what we've all been able to do together, and with the support of the governor and the lieutenant governor and really the whole team here. I'm very, very happy with where we are, and I think it gives us an even sounder footing for building off of as we think about the Park Service, not only of today but of 25 years from now.
That's great. I think it's really commendable for those folks in the current leadership and management roles who have been able to and willing to step up to really maintain services during the busiest time of the year. And had it not been, I think would have been a really challenging summer for the Park Service. And so we appreciate that and want to extend our appreciation to all of those who were willing to do that. A broader question about, I guess, just diversity in the ranks of the Park Service. I think oftentimes we want our state employee and state agencies rather to reflect the demographics of our state. And as you reconstitute the leadership of the Park Service and work more closely on better structure and standardized policies, what's your perspective and intent on how to make sure that the Park Service reflects the demographics of the state?
Yeah, so I would say, frankly, more broadly across the entire Department of Natural Resources, we do not reflect the diversity of the state of Maryland. It's a top priority for myself and for our leadership team. When I look at the Park Service, we actually have a very unique structure in the Park Service for recruiting, and that's the Maryland Conservation Corps and some of our other core programs. And what we're seeing is actually demographics within those programs that much more closely reflect the state of Maryland than our classified pins. And so as we are building out these opportunities, these 75 new positions, ensuring that we're providing those opportunities for folks that are going to reflect the diversity of the state is going to be a top priority. I think it's also really looking at our opportunities for within each one of our units for how people advance in their careers, right? We have a lot of positions that are highly sought after, technical positions, biologist positions, that when people get in them, they stay in them for 20, 30 years. And so ensuring that when we're recruiting and when we're bringing people into the agency in the entry level positions, diversity is a top priority because we know that once people get into these positions, they tend to stay for a very long time. So it's a top priority for us. And I think we're really excited about some of the tools that DBM has helped us develop. Thank you so much to Secretary Grady and Cindy Kolner. And also how we can now work more closely with our university system to recruit. We've got some fantastic relationships out at Frostburg, where we've actually been recruiting already, and helping us better reflect the diversity of the state.
Got it. Thank you. And then I also want to express my appreciation for kind of reconstituting the Fair Practices Office there in the department. I think, in many ways, it's surprising that there was only really one person handling fair practices for the entire department. And the fact that you've been able to triple that in the short period of time, I think is also very commendable to ensure that folks that have any concerns will have a fair process to be able to go through. My last question, I guess, pertains to there's a DLS report, I guess, that's still outstanding that you had cited. There was also, I think, required by the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, a report that was provided to the General Assembly by the prior Park Service superintendent that was due in December of 2022 and was sent to us just before the prior session started. That report obviously was compiled by the prior superintendent. And so, I think there probably is a different, or revised perspective as to how, recommendations might want to come forward from that report. I guess just wanted to hear your thoughts on where you see that report plugging in. Is there any value or validity to that report, given that it was probably put together by prior leadership and then also provided to us as folks have been leaving from the Park Service? Because as you mentioned, when you got here, the upper leadership of the entire Park Service was gone, and how that fits into the DLS report that's still outstanding.
Yep. Thank you very much for that question. We are evaluating that report and frankly, anything that was put together for GMOA that is putting us on that path to the future, right? The pin and the structure that we are putting together is really based more off of the work of the DLS and analysts and the existing Park Service employees, as well as folks that have worked in the Park Service in the past or work in Park Services in the counties. So we're taking a hard look at every single report, anything that was put out related to the future of the Park Service. And we are looking to better align that with the culture that we're seeking to foster and further create within that Park Service. So that's something that our leadership, once we have it fully reconstituted, we'll take a much harder look at. We've been reviewing as well internally. But I think all the long-term recommendations are going to, I think, be much more aligned with what we've learned over the past 9 months and over what we've seen with this year, with this season, and in partnership with the DLS analysts and their contractor.
So the long-term recommendations being what you expect to come out of the DLS report?
Yes, partially the
Okay.
DLS report and partially what we've learned through the town halls and the conversations with staff, and looking at other systems, how they're structured. We were in Pennsylvania recently talking about their park system. So ensuring that, as we rebuild or reconstitute this structure with the, frankly, once in a lifetime opportunity of these 75 pins, we're doing it with an eye towards a system that's going to function incredibly well, not only now, but way into the future.
So you don't see a need to have to re-examine the former superintendent's report, because your recommendations, which will be current, are coming out in a subsequent report.
Yeah, and we've also got there's a long-term planning that's being done from our lands perspective as well. So there's other pieces to this puzzle that we're looking to pull together that are based off of more up-to-date information.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I know, it's been really challenging transitioning to this role, given everything that you described. It sounds like you've really taken the bull by the horns and really just jumped into a top-down review and implementation of some much needed policies that were probably long overdue with the department.
Thank you, Senator Lamb. I appreciate that.
Any other questions for the Secretary? Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay, seeing none, we'll turn to the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. We have with us Secretary Scruggs. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Lamb, Chair Tar. Thank you for having me. My name is Carolyn Scruggs. I'm the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today are Tara Nelson, who is my Director of Human Resources, as well as Angela Washington, who is my Director of the Equal Opportunity Employment Office. I do believe we shared a PowerPoint with you. Okay, great. And you can go to the next slide. So thank you for having us today. We are happy to speak to you today about 3 topics: the employment workplace culture, our collective bargaining agreements, and the current U.S. Department of Labor investigation. And you can go to the next slide. So related to our hiring processes, I'm happy to say that the department is doing very well in that area. We have taken on aggressive recruitment efforts since coming on in January. And if you look at if everyone can see the PowerPoint in front of you, you can see that in calendar year 2023, the department has already hired over 100 community service positions, and that's a 72.4% increase from calendar year 2022. And we're also delighted that from January to June of this year, the department has hired 950 new employees across all different types of job opportunities that we've had. That is 107% increase in the hires in comparison to calendar year 2022. So the first half of calendar year 2023, the department also increased our correctional officer staff by 192. And I'm seeing in the chats that they can only see part of the slides. Thank you. And I will repeat again that we have increased our correctional staff by 192 correctional officers this year, which is a 17% increase compared to the first half of 2022. And you can go to the next slide. We have been doing that through we engaged in over 130 community recruitment efforts. What you see on the screen are pictures from 2 of our very large efforts. We had a large effort in April at the Oliver Community Center in Baltimore City, and we had another large effort in July at the Calvin Rodwell Elementary School. Those 2 events yielded over 1,000 potential applicants for employment with the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. And from that, we were able to reduce our vacancy rate. When I came in office in January, our vacancy rate was at 16%. As of today, the department has a vacancy rate of 12.4%. And you can go to the next slide. So we know that while hiring is important, retention is just as important. So as we look at our retention efforts across the department, we've had several initiatives that have allowed us to retain staff. Our retirement, retention and longevity pay for our correctional staff have allowed us to keep those staff on for at least 2 to 3 years more. And then additional bonuses that we have put as part of incentives for individuals that may be trainers or weapons qualified have also allowed us to retain staff a little longer. We are currently in the process of doing promotions, which will allow us again to retain staff. We're working on interviews and selection processes for our majors, our captains, and our sergeants at this time. And you can go to the next slide. We also wanted to share with you just a little about our workplace culture. And one of the things that I found when we came in, coming from a correctional background, having come up through the ranks, I was used to a annual in-service where you basically reviewed everything that was needed so that you maintain the training level within the department. We did not have that for our civilian population. So one of the things that we've done in working with the Office of Equal Opportunity is that we have created a multi-day training series for our civilian supervisors and employees. We started with a very robust diversity training and sensitivity training, and we started with the top level supervisors, and we are now working our way down. When I say top level, I mean those that are part of my executive team. We're tasked to do that, and we are now working down through individuals that are of lower rank within our civilian areas. The multi-day training that is being done talks specifically about workplace environment, managing workplace environment, what is EEO, knowing the difference between accountability and harassment, understanding your workplace, understanding how to manage individuals, whether it is discipline or whether it is mediation. So there are a number of different techniques that we are now training our civilian staff that we had not been doing. Crisis de-escalation, things that we knew worked well on the correction side, but we had not seen within the civilian population. And it is really helping us in our conflict management as we continue to move forward with promoting individuals into roles that, as they come out of uniform and go into roles of civilians. And you can go to the next one. One of the things that I'm very proud of, and we are one of very few in the country as we search to do this, is that I have implemented a liaison, a LGBTQIA liaison. He is a captain that has been here for quite a few years in the department. And his goal is to work with both our incarcerated population and our staff so that they understand how to collaborate as partners, so that we can work together and we can have a more smoother and a calmer environment within public safety. He has been doing quite a few trainings with our staff, as well as he has been a vehicle for our incarcerated persons to reach out to when they are having challenges with staff, so that he can then become the mediator so that we can quiet whatever that challenge is. We know that about 10% of our workforce are part of this community, and we just wanted to make sure that we were not leaving them behind and that we were addressing the needs that some of them challenges that they have on a day-to-day basis in the workplace. And you can go to the next one. Another big thing that we've done, and we are in the process of recruiting for, is a mediation program coordinator within the department. That is something that the department has not had, and we are going to use that person to improve working relationships and to foster mutual respect just amongst the entire team, amongst the department. So we will be bringing that individual on. They will work in conjunction with our Human Relations Department, as well as our Office of EEO and HR, so that we can have an internal mediation. I will tell you that most of the time in my career in the department, any mediation that has been done has been external to the department, but we will now retain that process within so that we can resolve problems without having to go outside of the department. And you can go to the next one. And so next we're going to speak briefly on collective bargaining, and you can go to the next slide. The department currently has 4 different bargaining units that support our staff and our positions. ASME being the largest. ASME represents about 7,545 of the some 9,000 staff that we have within Maryland Department of Public Safety. We also have bargaining units, MPEC and the AFT Healthcare bargaining units. So we have an array of bargaining units that support our staff. We work very closely with them to make sure that we are addressing any concerns and challenges that they have. ASME being the largest, we have more communication with them. We just recently had a LMC meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for September, and we are doing those meetings quarterly. But one of the things that we have shared with ASME is not to wait until the meeting to bring to us a concern. We do have a liaison in the HR unit that works directly with our bargaining partners. And if a concern arises before that LMC meeting, to bring it to us so that we can attempt to resolve it or either explain why things happen the way that they did. And you can go to the next one. And lastly is the U.S. Department of Labor investigation. I'm not going to say a whole lot on this because it is an ongoing investigation, so I cannot speak a lot, but I will tell you that we are working very diligently right now to evaluate and analyze the data associated with this investigation. We are in constant communication with not only DBM, but U.S. Department of Labor so that we can make sure that when we submit the WH-56, which is the invoice that shows who is actually owed based on this investigation, that we make sure we cover each and every individual that U.S. Department of Labor asks us to. I think what I can share with you that's a little different than the last settlement. The last settlement was strictly correctional officers. And when USDOL came back to us this time, one of the things they asked us to look at were other series, such as the correctional dietary officer, the correctional laundry officer, the correctional recreation officer, correctional maintenance officer. So we are now going back and looking at those individuals to see if indeed we need to make them whole based on the parameters that USDOL has set for this investigation. And that kind of concludes what I have, but I am happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Before we go to questions, is Ms. Nelson or Ms. Washington, are you both here for questions or do you have a presentation?
They're here to help with questions, ma'am.
Thank you. So do any of the members have questions? Okay, if not, I do have a couple of them. Chair Lamb, you want to go?
No,
you can go ahead. Okay, thanks. So first, I want to thank you for all that you're doing with the filling the vacancies. I can tell you, I see you at different events. I get notifications to spread with my constituents about it. I was at the state fair recently, and you guys are doing a great job at that. And the positions that you're filling, that's just amazing, the amount. But I have a question about it. What is the current vacancy rate, like the number of, if you have a number, not necessarily a percentage, of vacant CO positions, specifically CO positions?
Tara, do you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do. Currently, we have 647 vacancies, and that includes all correctional series. Of those, about 435 represent entry-level correctional officers. As you well imagine, those are the largest percentage of vacancies that we have within, the agency.
Okay. And then how about probation and parole officers? Do you have that number as well?
I can tell you we've made considerable strides with filling those vacancies. What I can tell you is parole and probation agents. I'm going to give you staff and agents. Vacancies are at 46 for parole and probation agents, and that is down over 50% from where we started in January. I think we have a candidate in background for every one of those positions. So we're less than the state's recommended vacancy rate as it relates to community supervision. And for the additional staff, there are about 14 additional vacancies. So considerable strides with those hiring efforts.
Absolutely. Okay, so this, I'm not sure if you can answer this offhand, but we talked about the 647 vacancies going back to the COs. Do you know, can you give me an approximate number for each facility or maybe a percentage for each facility of how many vacancies you have there?
Yeah, so some facilities obviously are doing much better than others. Within the central region, and that's Baltimore, Jessup. We've not had significant vacancies there. I think almost all of our facilities are within single digit vacancy rates. We still continue to struggle in our Eastern Shore and our Western regions, and that's Hagerstown, Allegheny County, and Cumberland. So those are where we see the most significant challenges. And so we're offering incentives. For instance, at the ECI facility, there are about 117 vacancies out of 640 total positions are filled. So 640 filled, 117 vacant. I don't have my percentage calculation in front of me, but what that is over 20% in terms of where we are with the number of vacancies that exist currently. That's one of our challenge regions, and how we've attempted to recruit is we're offering an additional incentive. So in addition to the salary, which is pretty competitive, it's over $51,000 for an entry-level correctional officer. We're offering a hiring bonus of $5,000. And in those regions, the Western region and the Eastern Shore, an additional $2,500 for those regional incentives. But we're still struggling. I think it's a national phenomenon. Rural areas tend to be heavily hit when we're trying to fill public safety positions. So we're doing better within the centralized regions.
Okay, thank you for that information. I do want to say I do visit a lot of your facilities every so often. Hopefully this afternoon I'll be at one, and your staff are all just amazing. I've had great experiences with everyone who works for your department. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Lamb, I believe you had some questions.
Yeah, thank you. And good to see you again, Madam Secretary. Thanks for being here with your staff. I had a follow-up question, I think, pertaining to the last point that you were making in the slides with regards to the U.S. Department of Labor review that's going on. So in a June 2023 letter to the Board of Public Works, you discussed that the department is going through a review of pay for a variety of staff that weren't covered by the recent settlement, which seemed like it was focused on correctional officers themselves. Can you tell us how many employees are still left to be reviewed, and what process is being used, and when we may be able to expect that review to be complete, if you have a sense of the timeline of that?
Sure. So you are correct. The previous administration, the direction that was given from USDOL was to totally focus on correctional officer staff. And then after the initial settlement, USDOL did receive another notice that staff had been omitted. And that's when they came back to us and they asked us to look at the additional series that I identified, which are the dietary officers, the supply officers. We do not have an exact number right now because we have to go back to 2018, and we are looking at numerous time clock plus records for 2018. And the reason I don't want to give you a number is because some of those individuals may have been caught in the previous settlement because at that time they may have been a correctional officer. So that's what we're working through right now with DBM, the comparison of that data, because we have many individuals that will start off as correctional dietary officers and become correctional officers, or start off as a correctional officer and go to other types of classifications that have that corrections in their name. So we're working through that. We are having meetings just about daily. We're meeting with the governor's office, keeping them up to date. As recent as yesterday, my data analysis staff received files from DBM, which contain tons of records that we have to go back through, just the way the workday is set up. But I will say to you that it is our hope that this next group is a lot less than the 3,844 that we addressed in July, because it is a smaller population as it relates to those types of classifications. There may be individuals in this group that are correctional officers that did transfer over. So we have to take that into consideration also.
So it sounds as though it's still early in the process, I guess, right? Because you just got some data over from DBM and you're still in the process of reviewing that. Do you have any rough sense or even an estimate of timeline when this review may be completed?
That's one of the things that the governor office continues to ask us. We are hoping, please do not hold me to it, but we are hoping October 1 that we'll have some significant data to be able to share. But again, it depends on the integrity of the data that we've received that we now have to do a comparison with to the data on the WH56 that USDOL sends us, and to make sure that everything USDOL sends us is correct, because I will share with you that during the past settlement, when USDOL sent us our paperwork back, they had combined names, they had removed names because they thought they were duplicates, where it may have been father and son that worked for us. So we really want to scrutinize this data very well so that this is a one and done, and we are able to touch everyone and make sure that we have not forgotten anyone in this settlement so that we can move forward. But as soon as we are able to share that information, I'm happy to share it.
So when you said October 1, you meant October 1 of this year?
Yeah,
very shortly. That's to be able to give us some more information, or that's when you expect the review to be done, just to be clear?
That's when we expect the initial review to be done. Then we have to, after we do that, then we have to submit, it's called the WH56 form, to USDOL. USDOL has to either accept it or say, here are the challenges that I see with it. Go back, look again, they'll give us some direction. If they accept it, then I can go back to DBM so that we can go to the Board of Public Works. We have to then put a dollar amount to it, because that's part of some of the scrubbing of the data, because if these individuals change their classifications during that time period between 2018 and 2022, when this reckoning period is, then we have to look at what were the various levels of pay, so that we can pay them according to where they were during those different intervals. So there are a lot of different tentacles to ensuring that this data is accurate. But we've been working on it diligently for some time now, and our goal is October 1 of this year to at least have a number that we know are impacted.
Okay, so that's kind of the retrospective kind of work that's being done. On a prospective view, with regards to wage theft, what processes have you changed or reformed to make sure that future instances of wage theft don't occur?
Great question, thank you. So we went back. One of the things that was corrected was the rounding that was taking place in the Time Clock Plus programming that we had for correctional officers. That was stopped, that was deleted, as well as the policy was updated. And it was also reviewed by ASME, the bargaining unit, so that we could make appropriate adjustments that both of us agreed upon. And so we could move forward in this manner so that this does not happen again.
Okay.
I think the biggest point is the rounding, because the rounding is what caused the initial settlement, sir. Going into working with the vendor and going into our Time Clock Plus system and stopping it from rounding off and allowing it to create actual time intervals is what it was the biggest change.
Okay, so it's a system level change at how it's being reported.
Yes, sir.
Separate question, it was kind of brought to our attention that that retirement eligible officers were offered kind of the ability to renew and to have a retention bonus, I guess. And those bonuses were for 4 years, and it's nearing the end of kind of that period for those bonuses to continue. It sounds as though there's a review being done on, or a negotiation that's taking place on, how or whether those bonuses would be able to continue, and that negotiation needs to take place or be wrapped up by the end of the year. Can you give us an update on the status of that negotiation, where that stands, and whether you will be able to meet that expected timeline by the end of the year?
Sure, you are correct. And I think Tara can best explain, but we have posed to DBM the request to extend the RLPI program. Tara, you want to speak to that?
Yes, Madam Secretary and Chair, we currently have the extension of that program in effect for our entry-level correctional officers, those that are members of our collective bargaining unit, until July of 2025. What's being negotiated with the Department of Budget and Management at this time would be to include the management level positions that are not part of collective bargaining. So the extension was not extended for them as part of the bargaining process that we have in place. So we're waiting to hear back as to whether or not members within those leadership ranks will be included. Right now, our correctional entry-level officers through sergeant do have the extension, so they can renew once their initial term has ended, and they can renew up through July of 2025.
Okay. And have they been made aware of that yet, or has that been announced to the employees there?
Yes, we actually are probably going to have a very robust program to get that messaging out before the end of the year. Most of the contracts are due to expire around January of 2024. So we'd like to have a much more robust public information session where we can explain what the enrollment period is, make sure everybody knows when their renew date is. So we're really gearing up to have that done for the fall.
Okay. And I guess my last question pertains to the Division of Parole and Probation. And it sounds as though there are some, I guess, meetings or negotiations that are taking place there. But there have been some concerns that employee participation is not part of that negotiation that's been taking place, in contrast to some other areas maybe within the department. Are you able to speak to that a little bit more?
So we have go ahead, Tara.
I'm sorry, Madam Secretary, you could probably speak to that. I think we had a meeting yesterday
Yes.
with their bargaining members. And so if you can speak to the ongoing LMCs we do have with the parole and probation leadership team, as well as the executive team.
Yes, we have been meeting. We've had at least 3 this year with the Division of Parole and Probation Bargaining Unit. Ms. Robinson leads that effort for ASME. She's also posed concerns to us in writing that we've been able to address or respond to. So we have been working very closely with them to resolve any matters that we're made aware of.
Okay.
And like Tara said, as recent as yesterday, we had a DPP LMC meeting.
Okay.
Labor management meeting.
That's helpful to know. Well, I appreciate the update. Any further questions from members of the committee? No? Okay. Well, thank you to Secretary Struggs and to your staff as well for being here as part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe next on our list, we have Denise Gilmore with AFSCME. We've heard a lot about AFSCME. Obviously, you represent many people that we've discussed today. So thank you for being here. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Madam Chair and Chair Lamb and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Denise Gilmore. I'm the Legislative Director for AFSCME Maryland. As you've heard, we're the largest union for state employees here in Maryland. We really do appreciate the opportunity to present the perspectives of our members here. To put it, very bluntly, we believe deeply in the good that collective bargaining can do in the public sector and with our employees. Over the years, we've been able to work with management to, reduce overtime costs for the state, lower safety incidents, improve procedures that, provide better and more efficient services to Marylanders. So this oversight that this committee is doing over the collective bargaining process in the state is really important, and we appreciate your work on this. Unfortunately, for the last 8 years, this relationship was largely non-existent, and I want to certainly give credit to Secretary Grady, and we are certainly making a lot of strides now under this new administration. We are working much more closely on resolving a lot of issues. I do want to use, because I just actually, heard and learned some things in the presentation from Secretary Scruggs previously that I think, highlight a little bit of where we are and maybe some of the work that we still need to continue to do. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we are, certainly communicating better, and we're making strides. Our experience in DPSCS, I think, sums up where we are, as a whole with a lot of our collective bargaining issues. We've got, 2 large divisions, the Department of Corrections and Parole and Probation, in which we represent members in. They both have, and you heard Secretary Scruggs mention them, they both have labor management committees. Those are, a really good sign of kind of where we are in terms of healthy collective bargaining relationships in the agencies. They're required in our contracts. Their purpose is to, come together to foster communication and to discuss and negotiate policies that affect working conditions and make, operations more efficient in the agency. And it's kind of a tale of 2 cities with DOC, the Division of Corrections, and the Division of Parole and Probation. In corrections, we always bring, our local presidents, folks that are on the line, know the work, and are empowered to, have the authority to represent the interests of their colleagues. On management side, in corrections, they bring the Deputy Secretary of Operations. They bring several deputy secretaries, right? People who are familiar with operations, people who can actually, have some authority in these discussions. And, to the credit, I'll say we've been able to, really resolve and work through some issues. In parole and probation, while we're meeting, we are meeting with the HR director who, is nice, certainly, but doesn't have that experience in operations, and certainly doesn't have authority. And so I think, where there's frustration, it's because, we can't make those meetings as meaningful as they should be, as we need to. We have real issues that are existed in PNP that, we're able to get fixed in DOC, but not necessarily in parole and probation. Looking at, staffing levels is a good example. With the Department of Corrections, we were able to work on a joint staffing analysis in the last year that concluded that we're, 3,000, positions short, across the system. In the Department of Parole and Probation, we haven't been able to, work with management on joint staffing analysis. They won't let our members, participate. We also have really serious safety issues in the, Division of Parole and Probation that we want to fix. We've got a group of about 20 to 30 home detention officers, who are responsible for monitoring all the folks on home detention statewide. And when, folks on home detention abscond, these are, our home detention officers are the ones that go and go out and make the arrests. They've been asking for the right safety equipment, for, the right vehicles to do this work, and we haven't gotten anywhere. So I think, there's, it's promising. We're starting to see examples in the state, certainly where that relationship is getting much healthier, and we're able to do those good things and get things worked out. But we still have, areas where, we need to improve. And I think, DPSCS is a great example. It's under the same secretary. And now that I know, Secretary Scruggs is on the call, and, we certainly appreciate that, Secretary Grady's still here. I hope that that's something we can work through, more quickly. But it's worth noting that, that's just kind of an example in one agency. If you throw in then that we've got all of these different personnel systems to deal with too, it creates kind of this large, ongoing project that we need to do to make sure that there's just, healthy relationships across, the agency. So I think we will get there. We certainly appreciate, again, your continued oversight and, the continued oversight of the administration and making sure that, we've got good partners wherever we sit, across the table. We think that's important, but we do still have some work to go. And then I think just the last two kind of updates that we wanted to give out to the committee is, we do, appreciate we work with the administration, very closely on this wage theft issue in DOC. We are anxious. This is the first time we've heard that October 1st may be, the deadline. We're going to get the, results of all the audits. We've obviously had, a first set of audits that, concluded the issue for all of our custody officers. We think there's still thousands of folks out there that, this audit will find, also saw their time shortened, stolen. So we want to make sure we get that corrected as soon as possible, and we appreciate their continued effort. And then staffing. And I know this has been, a conversation on everyone's mind. We're looking at, this is the first, we are eager to discuss and negotiate the terms of the longevity and retention program that was just brought forward. I know that this is news to us. We have been requesting it, over the summer to get a good plan on this. As it stands, if we do nothing, January 1st of 2024, we could potentially see 2,000 to 3,000 correctional officers retire as a result of that longevity and retention bonus going away. And we've really been pushing for some kind of solution on that we can work together on. So we are encouraged to hear that there are discussions happening where we hope to be looped in on those discussions very soon, so we can hammer out and negotiate the details on that. We appreciate, we definitely, we can tell that the state is working very hard on trying to hire these positions. Look, they're tough jobs, and I think where we can continue to work together on it, we've got a better shot at doing it. So we've got our work cut out for us, but we are trending, I think, overall in the right direction, and that we just hope that we can continue to work with this committee and the administration to really continue to make sure that we are being as effective as we can be in this collective bargaining relationship, because we really can do a lot of good together. So I'm happy to take any questions too that you might have. But thank you again for this briefing.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the members?
I just have one follow-up question for Ms. Gilmore. So you touched on parole and probation being handled differently than kind of the other, I guess, Department of Corrections, Division of Corrections within with these negotiations. I think Secretary Scruggs had provided in part an update of where she sees kind of the collaboration there and potentially bringing in more employee input. Do you see progress being made there, or is there still ways to go?
I think there's still a ways to go. And look, I think, again, it was really encouraging to hear reference to these labor management committees. Like, we really think those are fundamental in terms of, achieving those healthy collective bargaining relationships. And in large part, it starts with who you bring to the table, right? Like, it doesn't, anytime in negotiations, you want to make sure that you're sitting across the table from, people who thoroughly, understand the operations and then actually have authority, right? And we just don't have that in deep, our parole and probation employee relation or, labor context right now. And I think once we get, hopefully people who take, this a little bit more seriously, right, in terms of having the authority and having, the ability to actually, have a say in what goes on in the operations, I think we'll get much closer. But at this point, it's awfully hard to get something done if, the only person that you're given is the HR director. I think it would be much easier just from an operational standpoint to be able to, talk to the folks who are actually involved with operations. That would be my one piece of advice.
Okay, thank you. And I see Secretary Scruggs is still on. I hope the department will take that suggestion to heart and consider that moving forward.
Absolutely, sir. I don't know if Ms. Gilmore knows, but we have had both Director Danner as well as Deputy Director Tia Brunson in our LNC meetings. I don't think Mr. Nolly has been there. That's one of the other deputy directors, but both Ms. Danner and Ms. Brunson have been available and in the meetings. So I'm not sure that you knew that, but I've actually sat in the meetings with them there across from Ms. Robinson and others that represent the Division of Parole and Probation. So there have been high-level DPP officials outside of the HR director present. But certainly if there are things that you know that need to come to my office, feel free to reach out to us. My chief of staff is always available, a point of contact that can get to me, and we're happy to work with you to resolve them. Like I said before September's, when we have meetings, October, when we have monthly meetings and quarterly meetings, let me know.
Sure. Yeah. Moving forward, we'd love to see you all there again.
Great.
Any further questions? No, Chair Lamb, I'll leave it to you to introduce our last very patient speaker.
All right. Thank you, Secretary Scruggs. Thank you, Ms. Gilmore. We'll move on to the Maryland State Police and appreciate the patience for bearing with us today. We'll turn it over to the State Police Superintendent, Colonel Roland Butler. Colonel Butler, I think you're still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
My apologies.
Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon to the members of the legislature. It's a privilege to testify on behalf of the women and men of the Maryland State Police. The State Police has had a 102-year tradition of service with pride. When you talk about the Maryland State Police, you're not talking about just a singular agency. You're talking about 1,411 sworn personnel, another almost 800 civilian personnel, and we also now encompass the State Fire Marshal's Office, another 70 personnel. Unfortunately, MSP faces the same challenges that all law enforcement agencies face when it comes to recruiting and also improving conditions within the workplace. In an effort to improve conditions for all personnel, when I first came in, there were some things that were immediately a focus point for me. One was the expansion of our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and also a name adjustment within that. I wanted the people that were going to that office for help or seeking guidance to understand how vast the number of resources were there, from diversity encompassing individual differences down to equity, being treated fair across the board, to inclusion, trying to create an inclusive environment where everybody's part of the solution. Employees in the organization are always the greatest resource, and people need to know that. One of the problems you do have, just like any other law enforcement agency, once again, you have a paramilitary side, you have a civilian component. It doesn't lend itself to direct communication to resolve some issues in the most timeliest of manners. Some things should not be caught up in the chain of command. They require immediate action. We're talking quality of life issues when people come to work and when they think about coming to work. We're asking them to perform some pretty intense tasks under some pretty tense conditions. So we want to make sure that that actually exists. One of the things the state police did, we entered into an agreement with Morgan State University to examine the culture of the organization. We got the report back. There were some things that I think we all agree we could do better. It was a relatively small sampling when you consider just over 2,200 employees. They only had 40 people participate. Rather than say that the study was way off, we want to look at why only 40 people participated within that study. We do have another plan in place to expand upon this. It was costly. We're looking at trying to get the best bang for our buck and also understand what our people are doing. So that being said, we're looking to expand upon this and not abandon this study, but build upon the study so we understand what we're dealing with from a top-down culture. One of the things we work hand in hand on, and I want to talk about putting people in the seats, hiring. I'd like to give a special thanks to Secretary Grady and also to Secretary Scruggs. They do a lot as far as hiring and guiding the future of our department. Secretary Scruggs has invited us to every public safety recruiting event that she's hosted. Within that, there's also a sharing of information from her personnel. I've been to a couple where I stood back and I noticed something was a little bit off and I asked another person there. One of the things the state police kind of missed the boat on, when we go to hire, all our posters are troopers. We have almost 800 sworn positions. Within those 800 sworn positions, we have to advertise what our civilian people can do. You can be an auto mechanic. You can be an administrative specialist. You can be an emergency dispatcher. Emergency dispatchers, as I'm sure DBM can recall, We did a marvelous job of upgrading them and taking them out of a classification that really didn't fit what they do and give them something that's centered upon what they do, and also give them a healthy advance when it comes to income. We're working hard to try to fill those vacancies. The hiring process is a little bit different when you start talking about police operations versus a purely civilian operation. If we come back to ODI, one of the things we also looked at is the policy on transfers. That was one of the big sticking points, and that's something that's been a concern of mine since 1994. We can build a better system. We're working to build a better system. That system includes the personnel from ODI coming up with the process. We've adopted many of the measures that the Department of Budget Management uses. And we also work with the Minority Council to make sure we have a tiered approach. And we also add in our people from HRD. We're trying to build a robust program that stays away from any type of manipulation. We certainly don't think that we're going to paint with one brush and get this right. This is something we're going to have to continue to monitor, make sure we stay up on top of best practices, and we look at the outcomes. Not only are we looking at the outcomes of the people we take into these divisions, I also want the feedback of the people that don't get into these divisions. What did they think about the process? How can we improve? And they deserve that same feedback when they go through the system again. Hey, if you concentrate on these things, you make yourself more marketable and you're more apt to advance. We've also gone with additional staffing at ODI. We're adding an additional EEO investigator, and we're also, we're also looking to backfill a position that was vacated with the assistant director who took a job over at another state agency. So those are all things that are in process. We do have a candidate that's in the final stages of processing for that EEO investigator position, and we're hoping to get them on board pretty soon. We're also looking to add a member to my executive staff that has extensive private sector experience. He was a trooper 35 years ago or so, but he has extensive experience in the private sector, to include some major companies where he did project management. He taught diversity, and the only delay in bringing him on board, he's working with another area department on some diversity training and also on law enforcement agencies dealing with people with dementia. So he's certainly a forward thinker, and I think he'll help carry us forward into the next phase. One of the things that I think can help with what we experience in workplace culture and employee relations is the MSP mentoring program. All too often when we promote people, it's here you're promoted. It's more of an OJT thing. We want them to have a person that they can confide in a non-judgmental fashion that can show them the nuances of what they're doing. So there's more of a soft handoff. If you go from corporal to sergeant, you don't worry about being thrust into the deep end of the pool, so to speak. You have a soft handoff. Hey, these are the things you need to look out for. These are the things your people are going to need. And we're looking to professionally develop those people. We're also looking at reviewing of internal affairs case policies. One of those things, we're in the middle point of that transition from the abolishment of LEOBR to everything being handled under the new system. Once we close out those remaining cases, and we do still have some LEOBR cases remaining, we want to go back and give it a top-down look. Are we doing the right things by employees? Are we sticking to our own progressive disciplinary policy? Are we sticking to the matrix? If we do get outside of that matrix, is there written justification as to why? Be it a commander's endorsement, a troop commander's endorsement, a region commander's endorsement. That's not saying that they can't step outside and increase a punishment, but if you elect to do so, you owe it to the employee and the department and the citizens to articulate why that may be necessary in a given circumstance. We actually deal with two unions, SLEOLA and ASME. We have a number of civilian employees that fall under ASME, be it the aviation section or be it some of our dispatchers. One of the things with that, SLEOLA, we're subject to non-binding arbitration. I have met with SLEOLA. I've met with the members of the coalition. I have meetings scheduled with the Troopers Association and a meeting with ASME. ASME has been in the loop with a lot of things going on over at aviation with my executive command staff. I want to sit down and make sure I have a better understanding as to what we've agreed upon thus far and how we can move forward and put some of these things behind us and make sure that we have a safe and healthy work place for our employees. Again, recruiting. When we talk about recruiting, we're all fighting for the same group of people in the DC, Virginia metropolitan area. We just started a class on Monday where we expected to have 40 people. We only got 34. We have a tradition. It is a live-in academy. It is rather intensive. It's not unusual for somebody not to show up and go a different direction. One of the things that we're really concerned about, and we experienced it this time with candidates that had notified us, hey, we thought about this. We took a job at another department. And I'll give you an example, say a larger department in Northern Virginia. The styles of law enforcement are a little bit different. What state troopers do are a little bit different than what your municipal or your county officers do. Whether you're working on an interstate and you're working on a rural county, it requires a different mindset and it's a different approach to law enforcement. Oftentimes, after completing a few ride-alongs, people say, hey, I want to go try this over here. We do have troopers that leave. We had one that left to go to a local sheriff's office, and now they're coming back. So one of the things we've done to try to keep our employees in place is, one, we have a retention bonus that we're working on with DBM for our troops in the Washington metro area. 2 barracks in Prince George's County have the highest turnover rate. I believe I was the longest serving barrack commander at one of them and a first sergeant assistant commander at the other. It was nothing to turn over 13 people, 14 people at a time. That does not help with continuity. That doesn't help with professional development. You need to keep people in there, in that sphere where they're learning from the same group of people and they've developed the rapport to ask questions, to understand what they're doing, to master their craft. I think that retention bonus is going the right direction. I think we're in the final stages of trying to get that approved with DBM. And that's something we worked on quite a bit of time with Sleola. When you start to look at other roles that we're doing within that retention area, we've increased the entry-level salary for those that want to lateral over. When we say lateral over, they still have to go through our academy. However, that starting salary is rather healthy. We'll take it all the way out to step 9 on the trooper's pay scale, which is about $92,000. Unfortunately, it has had an adverse effect for some sheriff's office over in the eastern region. I think the last class we took 5 people from over there, but you know, it makes us better. Everybody has the option to work where they want to. And the only nuance to that is the state police. Obviously, we have statewide jurisdiction. You really don't know where you're going to be when you come out of the academy. You could be in Rockville. You could be up in Bel Air, Northeast, or you could go back down to Princess Anne. I'm not going to say it's a crapshoot, but there are factors that come into play when it comes to transfers, who's in queue in front of you. And it may take you some time, up to a year, 18 months, to get back to where you want to get to. But when you get there, you have that pride of being a Maryland State Trooper and serving the people that exist in your community. One of the things I did want to talk about is our HBCU partnerships. We continue to work actively with a number of the HBCUs, be it supported homecoming events, things like that, special activities, whether it's Morgan State, Bowie State. We have an active partnership there. And one of the things you'll see, we're building a new barrack down in Berlin. We've been in contact with members that represent UMES. That barrack will have a state-of-the-art crime lab. What better tool to have a student come as an intern, a short drive from UMES up to that barrack to work in the crime lab. That's one of those things we're hoping we can wrap everything up and bring to fruition very quickly, because that's the gateway moment. We'd love to have everybody come in to be a trooper, but not everybody wants to be a Maryland State Trooper. But a lot of people want to work on that technical side. That technical expertise is hard to come by. If you can get it in college, obviously it puts you a step ahead of those that are in process. As far as our in-service training to deal with culture, when I took over, in-service training was largely set. We're looking at changing a number of things, working with DEI and also our HRD section to make sure our troopers understand their responsibilities, and more importantly, the supervisors understand their responsibilities. One of the things we're looking to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion is to move them off-site. Right now, they're housed in the headquarters compound here. The director over there said it would probably be better to move them off-site. We work with DGS looking for a site, and we're still looking for a site now. We've identified 3 possible locations. If it's something that will enhance the anonymity of an employee that comes in, say, hey, I can talk about whatever concerns me without fear of retribution or retaliation, obviously that's something we want to do. We want the richness and the honesty of communication so we can deal with problems head on and address them. We don't want these things building up so they're at crescendo moments and employees have outbursts. That's not the way to do it. And that doesn't make your employee healthy. And it'll be an additional drain on our wellness program, which is something we've also stepped up. We want employees to have resources in place so that they can come in and be the best employee they can every day that they report to work. Excuse me. As we start to morph into different things, we're in the midst of community outreach also. I can talk to you about what we're doing about recruiting. We've increased the size of field recruiters from 35 troopers to do field recruiting to over 150. We're looking to build on those relationships. We have an active relationship with the president of the Randallstown NAACP, and I do applaud his efforts to put me in the room with some employee groups that were hesitant to speak with me. He fostered that open dialogue. We sat down, we understand where each other stand, and we're willing to work together at this point. And it's also put me in the position as superintendent to foster a relationship between two employee groups that have been separate for quite some time. I think sitting down and getting them in the room and realizing that their concerns are similar to one another's, and they're all looking to move the right direction, will be healthy for everyone involved. So as we set forth, I think it's no secret back on July 15, 2022, the Justice Department announced 2 inquiries into hiring and promotion with MSP. So far, we've cooperated with them fully with no negative feedback. We are dealing with a class action lawsuit and also a separate lawsuit initiated by a member of the Fire Marshal's office. We're going to continue to be transparent and be upfront with people and give them the information they need. Whatever comes out of that, we'll take that, address it, and we'll fix the problems that exist. We're going to become a better agency. I think we're head and shoulders above many of the agencies that we deal with right now, and we're going to continue to grow just by open and honest dialogue. So that being said, I'll wrap it up there. I'm sorry. Any questions?
I do have a question. First, thank you for being with us and for giving this overview. You mentioned the policy of transfers. It's been concerning you since, I believe, in the 90s. What is the concern with the policy that's been in place, and what are you trying to do differently that you believe will help fix that problem? So, like, what is the core problem with these transfers?
Okay, that policy has morphed a number of times since 94. What we're trying to do is put together one package where everybody is going through the exact same process. There are no surprises. There is no sharing of information to put anybody a leg up or anything like that. And nobody is called in, hey, we'll TDY or give you some temporary training here or allow you to be exposed. We want everybody to come in, present, for instance, the same cover letter, answer the exact same questions to the best of their ability. We're also looking to record those interviews so we can go back and look at it and look at the richness of the communication. Does what we have as far as a rating measure up with the responses in the rating sheet that the assessors have? We have never done that before. Oftentimes it was 2 or 3 people. You come in and, they'd be done in bulk. We want to space them out. We want quality people sitting in these seats. And we want to make sure that everybody is afforded the opportunity to put their best foot forward and advance professionally.
Right. Thank you. And I did have one other question. You mentioned about the expansion of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So I know you mentioned a few positions you're adding. Do you have a number of the amount of employees that were in that office and what you're trying to get it to? Is that what you meant by the expansion, to increase the amount of employees that are in there?
Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, we lost our assistant director over there. At that point, we had a director, assistant director, and with 1 admin aide. Then we hired 1 additional investigator. The assistant director has since gone on to another job. Now we're in process. We're closing the final hiring of additional EO investigator, and we're also looking to replace that director. That gives them the ability not only to investigate complaints, which take an extraordinary amount of time in some cases. I've worked in that capacity twice, but it also gives them the ability to continue to do outreach, go around the state and get feedback from the troopers.
Okay, so you're looking to also give them put more on their plate, basically.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I think that's it for now.
So I had some questions. And it's good to see you again, Colonel Butler. I guess a few concerns have been brought to our attention, I guess, in my office, and one of them pertains to I guess folks that have been promoted to leadership capacities in the agency right now. And so there was somebody that was moved into a newly appointed role of the lieutenant colonel, and they're coming from internal affairs. And I guess there was some concern that the Office of Internal Affairs was oftentimes at the nexus of a lot of these investigations pertaining to concerns about discrimination. And, I guess, what is your perspective of why someone who is in a leadership capacity within internal affairs would be appointed to another leadership capacity when a lot of the concerns kind of stemmed from reviews that were taking place internally that potentially some troopers didn't feel like were adequately addressed?
Okay, understanding what they said, I made 3 promotions to bureau chief and 6 additional promotions to major. Without identifying any individual by name, the person that I think you're referring to had been out of internal affairs for quite some time, moved over to personnel command, human resources. Any discrimination complaint is not investigated by internal affairs. That goes over to ODEI to investigate. They do not share information. ODEI can see the information from IAU, but IAU cannot see their information. The concerns, I hear what people are saying, but they need to understand the processes in place and the checks and balance. There is no one person in the system that can override any decision. Everything that comes up through internal affairs comes with recommendation, endorsement, recommendation, endorsement. Then it goes to the department prosecutor. The department prosecutor is a separate entity with more of a watchdog approach to be able to see everything that comes through. Then they take that, they meet with the individual's attorney, and if you elect to have a hearing board, that's where we have the department chair for discipline sits in, and he convenes that hearing board, and he's the deciding authority along with 2 peers, one of equal rank. So it's a 3-person tribunal. That goes away with LEOBR, obviously. Now we have administrative charging committees that hear all the findings. They take the recommendation from the department. They decide what charges apply, at which point that's offered to the defendant, and whether they take it or not. Then it moves on to the Office of Administrative Hearings to set a formal hearing. So hearing what the concern is, I think they really need to understand the processes in place. There is no way I would promote anyone with, lack of a better term, baggage. The people that I put in place are highly competent. They're very seasoned with extensive training. I think the bulk of them have had advanced training, be it the FBI National Academy or Northwestern School of Staff and Command. Some have had both.
Got it. Okay. You mentioned earlier that you're adding another EEO investigator, and if there are fair practices or EEO complaints, I assume they go to that office or they go to ODEI?
ODEI and fair practice are one and the same.
They're one and the
Fair
same.
practice was the old moniker when I worked here twice, so I apologize. I kind of use them as interchangeable when in thought and theory they no longer are. People need to understand that they do have many different concerns they can bring to that office. So my apologies.
And I guess what we're talking about here is really kind of changing the culture of the state police, right, of the agency. Yeah. And I think you've acknowledged that as well previously when we met, as well as during the executive nominations process. And I can't help but contrast that, Secretary Kurtz was here earlier with DNR and having to reform the culture of the Park Service, that they've really taken kind of a complete top to bottom review, new leadership changes across the board, 16 new acting leaders and managers being brought in. And, what you're describing seems to be a little bit less than what DNR has taken on with the Park Service, and the Park Service probably being a smaller agency than your own. And so, I guess, I'm still receiving complaints of folks that work within the state police that are concerned about retaliation. And when it comes to whether it was formerly fair practices or now ODEI, they feel that when they bring up concerns, they are being retaliated against. And so there's this continued culture of employees reluctant to report concerns of discrimination because it is not going to end well for the person that's bringing up the concern. What do you say to that about trying to change the culture there? I think, comparing it to DNR, where they brought in almost like a, triple the size of the Office of Fair Practices within the Park Service and within the department. How do you respond to that concern that, folks that work within state police that bring up these concerns may continue to be reluctant to do so because of the threat of retaliation?
When you talk about retaliation, my staff knows it will not be tolerated, and I expect them to investigate it fully. I put people in place that are capable of examining what they're dealing with as far as their structure. They're empowered to do that because there are going to be some personnel moves also. These are the people that I believe have the capacity to look and see what's best for the department and make the necessary moves. As far as the expansion of ODI, we're looking to move them off site, let them assess what they have, and if they need more investigators, the pens are certainly there. We're willing to put those people in the seats. I'm not going to inundate them with people. I work hand in hand with the director there, make sure she has the resources she needs. We're doing some robust hiring there. The people we're getting there are high quality people. So if we do need more, yes, we'll get more in there. I want people to be sure and be comfortable to give their viewpoint. You know, we can move them off site to another MSP facility. I don't think that solves the problem. If they want anonymity, we'll deal with what we have to do, even with physical constraints being what they are. We'll lease some property off site where they can go and they can have complete anonymity as they give their story and they want their issue addressed.
I don't know if it's necessarily just at least the concerns that have been brought forward to us are just an issue of the physical location of the office, but that there's information being shared by that office to others that could lead to retaliatory actions against that employee coming from other offices within the agency. So, I appreciate, kind of separating the physical locality, but, I think just bear in mind that there may be more than that's necessary there.
Yes, sir. And I will speak with the director. That director operates independently. She's been doing an outstanding job. I understand that people are not always happy when the outcome is not what they want, but I think she's been both fair and impartial in addressing her issues. And I can assure you that no one on my staff is making any inquiries about who's coming to her. The only thing we want to do is support her in her mission and get her information. If she needs to meet with the bureau chief, if she needs to meet with me to develop a better understanding as to cause, process, or what's going on with the information she received, we facilitate that meeting at a moment's notice. There are no delays with that.
Okay. Obviously, it's been well reported in the news media about some racist memes that went around, and not to get into the specific case of that individual, because I don't think that's where we would like to take this. But, I think you can understand that given the need for culture change in the agency, and for rank and file members of the state police, particularly Black officers, seeing the outcome of that case, there's certainly a lot of grousing amongst these Black officers with how that was handled. And, how do you kind of do the cultural reset when you are, continue to see many concerns within Black officers of the agency that say that that's an example of where there wasn't enough done, or there wasn't enough transparency, or the culture hasn't changed, right? And that's really difficult to do, and totally acknowledge that cultural change in an agency is not easy. But that case doesn't help, kind of advance the perspective of many of these Black officers that the culture has changed very much.
Senator, I also have to be very guarded in my comments with this particular case. There is litigation against that individual. I've been counseled to be very cautious as to what I say and stick with the initial statement that came out. I don't want to be dragged into a lawsuit where that individual sues me. What happened was unacceptable. The processes that were followed, as long as that was drug out, was certainly unacceptable. That was the first thing I asked about when I immediately returned. I got a date timeline. I got the people and players in the room that were responsible, that were still here. And I asked them exactly how that happened. And then I said, we're going to put something in place to make sure it does not happen. I think we are at that point now. You will not see any cases drag out like that. One of the things with that particular case, it came in at COVID when the courts were closed. And I'm giving you just a smaller overview that I've given some of the members of the legislature. There were a number of show cause orders. When the courts reopened after COVID, show cause orders were pushed to the very end of the docket. They took all the criminal and some other civil stuff first. So there was a delaying. By the time it got to where we saw what the conclusion could be, the goal there was to make sure that the citizens were kept safe and we didn't have an individual with that mindset still in law enforcement. It was a tough decision to make, but I think it was the right decision to close that matter out and move that person on. Certainly not what people wanted, but it's the hand that was there at that time. And it wasn't a unilateral decision on my part. I had a couple attorneys in the room, as well as chief of staff and some other people. Explain this to me, because I have to be able to explain it to someone else. And more importantly, I have to be able to look myself in the mirror and say I did what was right based on the circumstances that I faced.
Got it. And again, not specific to this case, but how do you provide that reassurance then to the rank and file, particularly the Black officers who, you know, have concerns and, you know, without going into the specifics of that, you know, want some reassurance from you, right? Do you reach out to them and have those conversations? Do you explain to them to the extent possible of the kind of challenging circumstances that that specific case, you know, presented itself with? You know, how do you do that outreach to the Black officers?
I just want to check a note real quick so I give you 100% accurate information. I met with the president and vice president of the Coalition of Maryland State Troopers, and I gave them an exact timeline as to what happened. And I allowed them to ask questions along the way, and I let them know how I arrived at the end result. And in the end, there were other people in the room. I asked them, did they understand the processes in place, what I was forced to deal with, and why I made the decision that I did. Both the president and the vice president said it's uncomfortable, but we understand why you did what you did. And I think the biggest part of that is a learning moment for superintendents when you have to make a decision, and I'll be guarded again, of this magnitude involving something like this. You have to get your employee groups in, talk to them about it in depth. And though I may be only to say so much, let them have an understanding where they can take back to their membership, their constituency, and explain what happened, and have faith in the system and the decision-making process, and for them to know that their people have input via those presidents and those elected officers.
Okay, that's helpful. I appreciate that explanation. We also had a concern brought up about just kind of generally diversity of the workforce there at the agency. You know, obviously part of the culture change also involves bringing on a diverse workforce, and you know, I think the ODI components are a good start. There was a concern brought up specifically about some of the special units that, for example, some of the special units have one or maybe no minority officers, right? And obviously, you know, you can only promote those who apply for these positions or promote from within if they're kind of the diversity that reflects what you're trying to, you know, uplift. What are you doing to improve diversity amongst the ranks, including of some of these more specialized units that seemingly do not have the level of diversity even that the broader you know, population of employees at the department have?
One of the problems with some of these specialized units is the tenure of individuals that have been there. They're siloed. They've been there for far too long. I think we need to rotate people out on a more frequent basis. And one of the things you hear is, okay, they have institutional knowledge and experience. We can work that out, and we're going to work that out. We're in the process of working that out in such a way when someone transitions out, they still have the ability to provide some training to that individual. The other part of that, as far as bringing people in, is to make sure we have a more systematic approach where we can look back and say, hey, this was above board and even across the board. When you start to look at promotions, we have what a competitive promotion process up until the rank of captain. You study, you go do your structured resume, and then there's an oral interview, and then you're ranked at that point. You know, those things, that is part of SLEOLA's bargaining agreement. That takes some legislative action to change that. We work hand in hand with SLEOLA. We work hand in hand with the coalition. The last few changes to that system, they come at the request of one employee group, and we're still working with that employee group and getting them to speak with SLEOLA to build the best product possible. But it has to be an even exchange and understanding as to give and take and what they can agree upon.
So you recognize that there may be overextended longevity in some of these special units, I guess, and
yes,
you know, there's some intention to kind of take a clean look at that.
Not some intention. I intend to look at it, sir.
Okay.
There are people that have been there for far too long. We all come on this job to be a uniformed trooper. At some point, that is the foundation of your being. You need to rotate back to that. And as a uniformed trooper, if I come out of criminal investigation, computer crimes, you're a new trooper, I see you have the aptitude. I help mentor you to put you in that position. I help you with your resume. I help you with specialized training. I'm looking at people that want to make the organization better as a whole, not look at themselves, but look at the organization, make them the best organization that we can be to serve the citizens.
Got it. Okay. You mentioned the Morgan State study, which doesn't look like it was made public for some reason. And so we haven't been able to, I guess, take a look at it beyond what was reported in the media, which was only obtained through a Public Information Act request. You also stated that you want to build on that study, but didn't elaborate how you plan to build on that study. Can you provide some further perspective on where you think that might lead to?
Not to be controversial, I think that was posted before the PIA went out. It was posted for the employees to see. So I think it's out there floating. One of the problems we had, there were some issues identified as far as participation and different aspects of that study. We're not looking to argue any point. We're looking to make a better mousetrap. We have two options that the director of ODI is exploring. One would have us continue down the same road with Morgan State. That second option puts us with another company that's in that same venue. It's called Culture Amp. The pricing is a little bit more competitive, and you get much more in the feedback loop, much more in the participation, and a lot of it is virtual. You don't have to rely on an individual going to a site. They can do it online. Their anonymity is protected, and I think that's the biggest thing. When you speak of people worried about retaliation, if we can protect their anonymity, we can get to the richness of their concern, which puts us in a position to address that, and that's what I'm looking for.
You have a time frame in mind for when that might proceed forward?
Looks like we're working on that. I just got the option 2 probably about a week ago or so. I'd like to sit down and talk with the director of ODI and see how exactly we can implement that and how quickly we could implement it. I would love to see that in place by the first of the year, have us push through, get that information, and start to really move into the high-speed realm of making changes.
Okay, that's helpful. I think that covers most of what I had. I think there's some specific complaints that were brought forward that I may just follow up with you individually. I've continued to hear from Black troopers as well as Asian troopers who have expressed some concerns with discrimination. And I know it's a work in progress and culture change is hard, but really urge you to proceed with a high level of urgency on this because it sounds like it's also very long overdue for this agency to have this overhaul. And while culture change is difficult, I think it is really incumbent on you to really set the tone and bring new leadership in that will reflect the diversity and the openness as well as transparency that we'd like to see in the department, all things that you had committed to earlier as part of the nomination process and review. So, would really urge kind of proceeding with as much expediency as possible.
Yes, sir, and I look forward to that conversation.
Okay. Other questions from members of the committee? All right. I guess seeing no further questions, I think we've reached the end of our agenda. Is that right?
We have. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you all. I appreciate your time and taking the time to listen to me and my concerns, as well as share yours with me.
Of course. Okay. Yes, I believe that concludes the meeting. That's the end of the agenda.
Okay. Well, thank you to the members of the committee. Appreciate committee staff for your efforts in organizing and pulling this together. I think we have another joint committee hearing coming up, but it's not for a few months. And so members of the committee, just stay tuned. We'll get more information as well as an agenda out to you as it gets closer.
Yes, sir.
Take care.
With that, thank you. We're adjourned.